She walked into a Mafia club to hire revenge. Everyone thought Emily Carter came there broken, humiliated, and desperate after being dumped for a political marriage. But what nobody saw coming was this. The man she asked for help was Adrian Moretti, the most feared kingpin in the city. She only wanted a fake boyfriend for one wedding. Instead, she got trained like a queen, paraded in front of her ex like a living nightmare, and dragged straight into a war where one wrong move could get her killed.
With trembling hands, Emily Carter walked toward the city's most feared man with a proposition so insane it was a death wish. Pose as her lover at the wedding of the man who broke her. Cast aside, shamed, made to feel like less than zero, she had one card left. An ancestral treasure, a Hail Mary scheme, and a stubborn pride that refused to let her vanish without a fight. She couldn't know that Adrian Moretti, a king ruling an empire of dread, would find his own reflection in her shattered gaze. A vision that would shake him more than any rival. If you're listening, tell me where you are. I want to feel how far Emily's story echoes tonight. And if you need to know if she walks away from this choice alive, give this story a like and stay with me. The Crimson Lounge. It was never a sanctuary for women on the edge of ruin. It was a predator's den, veiled in sophistication, with velvet booths and fixtures that outvalued a person's life, filled with patrons who sealed deals in hushed tones and deep shade. In this place, you knew everyone, and newcomers were brought in by the powerful, or removed by men carrying steel. Emily Carter belonged to neither camp. She lingered near the doorway, clutching her coat against a November frost that had seeped into her bones, feeling the weight of every gaze that followed her. A hostess with immaculate posture and a smile that could chill blood intercepted her, moving with the cold precision of a guard dog. I do apologize, miss. This is a members-only establishment. Emily's mouth felt like dust. She had practiced this scene over and over on the train, but facing the velvet rope, the true barrier between her past and her terrifying future, the words seemed hollow. I must see Adrian Moretti. The woman's face remained a mask, but a dangerous light danced in her eyes. A warning. Mr. Moretti does not accept unannounced guests. I am aware. Emily's voice was a steady whisper, a stark contrast to her racing heart. But I possess information he will want. I have no doubt. The hostess's smile became a razor's edge, and you may leave it with his aid, just like all the others. Emily could feel the opportunity dissolving, the old familiar burden of irrelevance settling upon her once more. For 3 months, she had been a ghost. At her job, in her home, in the world she shared with a man who deemed her disposable. She was so profoundly tired of being erased. Inform him, she stated, revealing a small velvet case from her pocket, that I have come to make a trade. The hostess's eyes flickered to the case, then back to Emily's defiant face. An eternity passed in silence. Finally, the woman raised a flawless hand, summoning a figure from the gloom. He emerged as if from nowhere, tall, wide, in a suit that likely cost more than her monthly rent. He remained silent, his gaze a clinical assessment that inventoried her very soul. She claims to have something for Mr. Moretti, the hostess announced. The man extended a hand. After a brief pause, Emily surrendered the velvet case to his grasp. He opened it with chilling disinterest, his eyes scanning its contents for precisely 3 seconds before closing it with a final snap. Stay put. He vanished into the heart of the lounge, carrying her final hope away with him. So she waited. The hostess resumed her post, dismissing Emily with an expert apathy honed by years of witnessing the desperate plead for a world that would never accept them. 2 patrons emerged from the club's depths, their unheard laughter trailing behind them. They carried the scent of wealth and fine perfume, and their eyes passed right through her. Emily measured time in heartbeats. 57 of them passed before the man reappeared. He will grant you 5 minutes. She followed his lead down a disorienting labyrinth of hallways, past closed doors, hiding secrets she did not wish to uncover. The lounge's music died away, leaving a profound and heavy quiet. He halted at an unremarkable door, rapped twice, and moved aside. 5 minutes, he reiterated. Emily's hand was on the knob before she could process the madness of her actions. She turned it and entered. The room was more intimate than she had imagined, and dimmer. Vast windows displayed the city below, but the lighting was so subdued the skyline seemed like a distant, unreal mural. There was a desk, 2 chairs, and the man behind it who did not acknowledge her arrival. Adrian Moretti. His face was known throughout the city, a phantom in newsprint that everyone recognized. But a picture could never convey the sheer weight of his presence, how the very atmosphere warped around him. He was perhaps 35, with dark hair a fraction too long, sculpted features, and a face that might have been handsome were it not utterly devoid of warmth. He placed the velvet case on the desk, slid it back in her direction, and at last he met her gaze. His eyes were the color of stone, not blue, not green, but a flat gray, like a winter sky or something that had long forgotten the sun. "You have 4 minutes remaining," he stated. His voice was a low, disciplined murmur, empty of all curiosity. "Spend them well." Without an invitation, Emily took the seat opposite him. It was a minor rebellion, but one she desperately required. A way to confirm she could still act, still choose, still occupy a space that was trying to reject her. "My name is Emily Carter. 3 months ago, my former fiancé terminated our engagement for a politically advantageous union arranged by his family." She held Adrian's gaze, searching for any hint of a response. She found nothing. "The ceremony is in 2 weeks. I was invited." How festive. Adrian's tone was so flat he could have been discussing laundry. "I fail to see how this concerns me. I require an escort." That, at last, provoked a response, a subtle one, the barest arch of an eyebrow, a gesture that could mean anything from ridicule to annoyance. "You wish for me to accompany you to a wedding. I need you to create the illusion that I am over him, that I was not shattered by this, that I am not the pitiful creature they imagine me to be. So your grand strategy was to walk into my club, offer a family heirloom to a man you do not know, and pray for the best." Heat rose in Emily's face, but her eyes did not waver. "My strategy was to find a man who knows the sting of being misjudged. Someone who understands that survival sometimes means crafting a fiction so compelling it becomes the truth." A change occurred in Adrian's expression. It wasn't a softening, he seemed incapable of such a thing, but a new focus, as if her words had struck a chord the ring never could. "You are aware of who I am," he stated. A fact, not a query. "I know what matters. Then you know that I do not grant favors to people who trespass on my time. This is not a request for a favor. It is a business transaction." Emily gestured to the case. "My grandmother's ring. It has a value of at least 20,000, perhaps much more. It is yours for a single evening. Just one. You appear with me, you perform the part, and after, we are strangers again." Adrian settled back into his seat, his intense scrutiny making her skin crawl. She willed herself to remain motionless, to hold his stare, to act as if she were not dissolving under the weight of his presence. "What gives you the impression I am in need of a ring?" he finally inquired. "Everybody has a need, even you, and what need is that, Miss Carter?" Emily paused. Here it was. Her final chance to retreat, to apologize for the intrusion, to reclaim her ring and the shreds of her self-respect. But she had already come so far, already breached the gate. She had taken a seat she was never offered. She would see this through to the end. "I believe," she began, measuring each word, "that your entire empire is founded on perception, on fear, on commanding a respect so absolute that no one dares to challenge you." He let the silence hang in the air. "I believe you know better than anyone that the narrative others have of you is your greatest asset. And I need a new narrative. I need them to see a woman who did not merely endure, a woman who conquered." For a long while, Adrian was completely still. Then he lifted the case, opening it once more, this time studying the ring with a newfound gravity. It was an unassuming piece, a gold band holding a modest sapphire, devoid of any real spectacle, an object cherished for its history, not its price. "This wedding," he murmured, his gaze still fixed on the ring. "The location? The Belmont estate, roughly 1 hour from here. And the groom's name? Nathaniel Ashford." That name sparked a change. Adrian's eyes shot up from the ring, and for the first time, a flicker of what looked like authentic interest surfaced. "Senator Ashford's heir." "Correct. And he was your fiancé for 2 years?" Adrian shut the case, placing it carefully on the desk. When his eyes met hers again, his focus was so sharp, Emily felt as though he was peeling back every layer of her soul, exposing every secret, every falsehood, every hidden fragility she possessed. "You propose I enter a room of power brokers, the elite, and men whose fortunes erase all consequence." His voice was low. "You want me to feign a romance with a total stranger, and you ask this in 2 weeks, demanding a performance so flawless no one would ever question it. Your offer is this ring, a keepsake worth less than my midday meal." Emily's spirit crumbled. He would refuse. The idea was absurd. She had made a grave error. "I accept," Adrian said. Emily stared. "What?" "I accept," he repeated, "but your ring is not the price." He slid the velvet box back to her. "You will keep it. A prop for our little play. So what is your fee?" Adrian rose, circling the desk with a fluid menace, a man skilled in violence and better still at concealing it. He paused just beyond arm's reach, forcing her to crane her neck to meet his gaze. 2 weeks, he murmured. "You will grant them to me. I will mold you to carry yourself into that wedding as if you were born to it, how to talk, to glide, to make every soul there certain that you did not merely recover, you upgraded. When this is over, Nathaniel Ashford will see you and question how he ever dared to imagine better." "Why would you ever do this?" A shadow passed over Adrian's features. "Let us say I know the sting of being dismissed, and I hold no affection for the Ashford clan." His hand extended between them. "Do we have an accord?" Emily stared at his hand, then at the man it belonged to, and the precipice of her choice. She had come with nothing but a desperate scheme and a memory. She braced for rejection, for mockery, or worse. She never foresaw this, never foresaw his acceptance, never foresaw the way her own blood raced when he studied her like a cipher he was determined to break. She needed to refuse, to turn and leave, to retreat to her silent life, her silent flat, the silent anguish she had nursed for 3 long months. But Emily Carter was so terribly weary of being silent. She grasped his hand. Accord. Adrian's home, no, his sky palace, was both what Emily envisioned and something she could not fathom. It claimed the 3 highest floors of a tower that stared down the river, a monument of glass, of steel, of that stark opulence that comes from owning enough to discard all that is needless. The walls, white, the furnishings, black. The art was the sort with names she'd never know and values that would make her ill. You will reside here, Adrian stated, guiding her through a gallery that pretended to be a home. The guest quarters occupied the 2nd level. Bedroom, bath, a study, all you require. Emily froze mid-step. I'm sorry, what was that? Adrian pivoted, his face a placid mask. If our charade is to be believed, we must collaborate. This means your presence is required here, daily, for the coming 2 weeks. Your staying is simply efficient. I have a career, an apartment. Request leave or resign. The choice is of no consequence to me. He resumed his path, assuming she would follow. As for your flat, keep it for your peace of mind, but you will not have time to return. Our work is substantial. A chill took root deep in Emily's soul. You said you would coach me, make me convincing. You never mentioned becoming a resident. Adrian halted at a doorway, opening it and motioning her inside. Miss Carter, you presented me with your dilemma. I am giving you the resolution. If you would rather arrive at that wedding just as you are now, furious, broken, and so visibly fragile that all will see it instantly, then please return home. But if you wish to enter that room and make Nathaniel Ashford lament every decision he has ever made, you will trust that I understand what must be done. He was not mistaken, and Emily despised him for it. She crossed the threshold into a space 3 times the size of her own dwelling. A king-sized bed, windows from floor to ceiling, a bathroom fit for a resort. The room was immaculate, sterile, flawless. I will arrange for clothing to be sent to you tomorrow. Adrian's voice came from the hall. For tonight you should rest. We begin at 6. 6? In the morning? Do you have a prior engagement? Emily spun to confront him, to protest, to declare this entire thing madness and demand to go home. But Adrian had already vanished. She stood isolated in the guest suite, adrift in a sea of wealth she could never attain, trying to recall her life from just 3 hours ago. Before the lounge, before the bargain, before she sealed a pact with a man who saw her as a problem he had chosen to solve. Her phone vibrated. A message from Maya, her closest friend. How did it end? Did he laugh you out of the place? Emily perched on the bed's edge, her fingers hovering over the screen. He agreed. The reply was instantaneous. What's the catch? And now Emily began to write, then paused. How could she articulate this? How to explain that she'd just consented to live for 2 weeks with a man whose reputation was built on shadows she dared not inspect? That she'd fled one dire strait for another, and now sat in a penthouse that cost more than her lifetime earnings, wondering what on earth she had done. She erased the partial text and sent a simpler truth. I'll call you tomorrow. It's not simple. She didn't look for a reply. She just set the phone aside, slipped off her shoes, and fell back onto a mattress that felt like a captured cloud. The ceiling above was a canvas of perfect, empty white. No flaws, no watermarks, no trace of life. It was immaculate. It was suffocating. She shut her eyes, willing away the image of Nathaniel, willing away his expression as he broke their engagement, regretful yet resolute, as if his honesty were a kindness, willing away his mother's voice 3 weeks later, gently advising that Emily should proceed with dignity rather than cause a scene. The wedding invitation had arrived 2 days after that. Heavy cardstock, gold script, her name elegantly printed beside the words "and guest." Its cruelty had left her breathless. But here, lying in Adrian Moretti's guest suite, caught in a deal that felt like both rescue and a snare, Emily felt something new bloom. She felt formidable. 6 a.m. arrived too quickly, too harshly. Emily was jolted awake by a knocking at her door. It was sharp, insistent, and utterly unapologetic for the hour. She pulled herself from the bed, still dressed in the prior day's attire, and opened it to find a woman in the hall. Not Adrian. A woman. Perhaps 50, with silver hair in a tight chignon and a posture that spoke of discipline from someone who used a ruler and had no time for imperfection. She assessed Emily in a single glance, her face revealing nothing. "Mr. Moretti awaits you in the dining room," the woman announced. "I am Claudia. I am the household manager. You have 15 minutes to become presentable." She pivoted and departed without waiting for a reply. Emily remained in the doorway, barely awake, struggling to comprehend the encounter. Then she glanced down at her own state. A wrinkled blouse, yesterday's denim, and hair that appeared to have lost a battle with a storm. She rushed to the bathroom. 14 minutes later, she entered the dining room in the same outfit, but at least having made an effort to shower and tame her hair. Adrian was already at a table that could have easily seated 12. He was scrolling on his phone, sipping coffee from a cup that was likely worth more than her rent. He looked up as she approached. "You are tardy. You said 6. "It is 6:14. I said 6. He placed his phone down, indicating the seat opposite him. "Sit." Emily obeyed, feeling like a student summoned to the headmaster's office. Claudia materialized with a plate of food, eggs, toast, fruit that was too beautiful to be real, and placed it before her without a sound. "Eat," Adrian commanded. "I have no appetite." "I am not concerned. You will require the fuel." Emily lifted her fork, more from defiance than need, and tasted eggs better than any she had cooked in a year. Adrian observed her with that same unnerving focus from the night before, as if he were documenting every gesture, every flicker of emotion she did not know she possessed. The scrutiny was profoundly unnerving. "Speak to me of Nathaniel Ashford," he said at last. Emily lowered her fork. "What is it you wish to know?" "Everything. Your first meeting, the duration of your time together, his desires, your desires, and why he chose another." That final inquiry struck like a physical blow. Emily felt her chest constrict. She felt the carefully laid bricks of her composure begin to fracture. "His family required a strategic political merger," she stated, her voice steady. "I was a paralegal with college loans and no influence. The woman he will marry is the daughter of a congressman. It was a logical choice." "Logical," Adrian echoed, the word tasting like ash. "That was his term for it, yes." "And you just accepted that?" Emily's gaze snapped upward. "What's that supposed to prove?" "It proves men don't abandon a 2-year bond for practical reasons. They leave because they want out. His political engagement was merely a pretext. I need the true cause." The words struck with an unanticipated force. Emily felt a foulness rising within her, a mix of fury and humiliation, the specific ache of a truth she had actively avoided. "He said I was too predictable," she admitted softly, "too settled. He claimed being with me was like lacing up the same old boots every single morning. Utterly reliable, but devoid of excitement. Nothing that made the dawn feel like a new promise. Adrian's face remained a mask, but a sharpness ignited in his eyes. And you allowed him to say that to you. What was I to do? Argue the point? Insist he was mistaken? He wasn't mistaken, Adrian. I am predictable. I am settled. I am precisely the sort of woman who blends into the wallpaper while men like him, men like you, consume all the air in a room. Then for what reason are you here? The question blindsided her. Emily's mouth opened, then shut, as she fumbled for a reply that held any weight. Because I am sick of blending in, she said, her voice a near whisper. I am sick of being the person no one remembers. I am sick of my life being a loop between work and home, a gray space between being unseen and being unimportant. And perhaps that makes me pitiful, appearing at a stranger's home with my grandmother's ring and a frantic scheme. But I'm finally taking action. I am finally making an effort. Adrian settled back into his seat, observing her closely. Then he did something entirely unforeseen. He smiled. It was not a compassionate smile. It held no warmth, no comfort, none of the qualities a smile should possess. It was cutting and frigid, yet held more authenticity than anything she had witnessed from him. Excellent, he stated. That's the first bit of truth you've offered since you arrived. Now eat your breakfast. There is a great deal we must accomplish, but the following 2 weeks were the most grueling of Emily's existence. Adrian did not show her how to be persuasive. He tore down every reflex, every mannerism, every shield she had erected, and made her rebuild it all from the ground up. He began with her gait. You walk with your shoulders first, he noted on day 1, as she crossed the penthouse for the 10th time. You're apologizing for existing. Cease. I'm not apologizing for anything. You are hunched. Your stride is short. You are actively trying to shrink yourself. I can see it from here. Emily corrected her posture, raised her chin, and crossed the room again. An improvement. Now repeat it. And this time, know that you own this space. You are not begging to exist. You are not waiting for someone to grant you a glance. You are claiming what is rightfully yours. She walked over and over until her feet throbbed and her spine protested, and she felt the urge to scream at him to just let her rest. But Adrian offered no reprieve. He scrutinized each movement, rectified every flaw, and drove her past the limits of her own endurance. And gradually, almost imperceptibly, a change began. By the close of the first week, Emily could traverse a room and command notice without uttering a sound. She could meet a gaze without wavering. She could stand beside Adrian, who was tall and formidable and occupied space as if by divine right, and not feel herself diminish. The second week, he turned his attention to her words. The guests at that wedding will attempt to unnerve you, Adrian remarked at dinner on the 8th evening. They will pose questions meant to humiliate you. They will offer remarks disguised as compliments that are, in fact, daggers. You must learn to parry without appearing wounded. How? Repetition. I will assume the role of Nathaniel's mother. Emily nearly chuckled. Nearly. You're going to impersonate his mother. Would you rather I portrayed Nathaniel? The notion of Adrian imitating her ex-fiancé was so preposterous that Emily did laugh. Very well, be his mother. Adrian adjusted his position, and then, astoundingly, his whole presence transformed. His bearing relaxed, his face adopted a practiced amiability that never touched his eyes. When he spoke, his voice was altered, silkier, more gracious. Emily, my dear, what a delight to see you. I was unaware you had recovered so swiftly. You simply must tell me about your new companion. The impersonation was so precise that Emily's stomach plummeted. She had endured that identical tone from Nathaniel's mother 100 times, a sweetness that was pure acid. He is more than a companion, Emily stated, fighting to keep her voice level. We have been together for some time now. How lovely. And his profession is? I'm afraid I don't recognize the name Moretti. Is he in the financial sector? Emily paused. This was the part that filled her with dread. How could she describe Adrian's work without revealing anything at all? He works in private enterprise, she said with care. Adrian, maintaining his persona, beamed. How charmingly ambiguous. Well, I am certain he must be quite prosperous to be seen with you. You always had a knack for attracting men who could offer security. The words landed with their intended sting, sharp and cruel and crafted to make Emily feel insignificant. But rather than retracting, rather than allowing the comment to lodge in her soul and poison her, Emily did something new. She smiled. In fact, she said, her tone serene and distinct, I believe you will find that I am the one who offers security. Adrian's world can be rather turbulent. It is helpful to have someone who keeps him centered. Adrian broke character, his true smile reappearing, the sharp, cold expression that signaled he was genuinely impressed. Better, he said. You absorbed the insult and reframed it as a virtue. You made yourself indispensable, not just an accessory. You must do that each time someone attempts to belittle you. They rehearsed for hours. Adrian became everyone. Nathaniel's mother, his father, unfamiliar guests, even Nathaniel. He subjected her to every conceivable situation, every biting remark, every veiled insult, every maneuver designed to make her feel like an outsider. And Emily discovered how to retaliate. Not with rage or defensiveness, but with a serene assurance born from the knowledge she had endured far worse than anything these people could inflict. By the time the wedding was 3 days away, Emily could hardly recognize the woman in the mirror. She stood in her guest suite, adorned in a gown Adrian had commissioned, midnight blue silk that clung to her as if it were a second skin. She saw a different woman, one who stood taller, who did not shrink from the space she occupied, who appeared as if she belonged at the side of a man like Adrian Moretti. You are prepared, Adrian announced from the doorway. Emily pivoted. He wore a flawlessly tailored tuxedo, looking as though he had been pulled from a feature on modern-day Titans. But it was the look on his face that held her captive, a near gentleness in his gaze, something akin to pride. Are you certain? She questioned. I have no doubt. He crossed the space, stopping before her to fix the necklace she wore, a delicate gold chain, whose pendant echoed the ring she had offered him. Emily, meet my eyes. She obeyed. When you enter that reception, Adrian said softly, every person there will perceive what I perceive. Not the woman left behind by Nathaniel Ashford. Not someone desperate to prove a point. They will see the person who has already claimed victory. Emily's breathing hitched. How can you be so sure? Because I have spent 2 weeks witnessing you become her. He retreated, and the intimacy of the moment vanished, replaced by the cool distance Adrian always preserved. Yet Emily felt a deep internal shift, something perilous and frightening and true. She was developing feelings for him, not for the act, nor the safety, nor the metamorphosis, nor for the lessons in commanding a room. She was falling for the man who acknowledged her when she was unseen, who compelled her forward when she wished to surrender, who saw a different woman in her before she could see it herself. And that posed a problem because in 3 days, she would arrive at Nathaniel Ashford's wedding on Adrian Moretti's arm, perform the part they had rehearsed, and then it would all end. The contract would be fulfilled. Adrian would return to his kingdom, and Emily would return to being the woman she was before. Only now she carried the memory of being someone else, someone more powerful, more courageous, someone who was not truly her. "The car is scheduled for 3, Adrian said, already turning toward the exit. "Do not be tardy." He was gone before she could answer. Emily faced the mirror again, scrutinizing the woman reflected there. The gown, the posture, the newfound confidence she now wore as a shield. She had asked Adrien to teach her how to navigate his world. She had never imagined the price she would pay to have to leave it behind. The day of the wedding dawned under a sky of uniform gray, which threatened a downpour, but held back. Emily was awake before her alarm, her stomach already coiling into knots that were unrelated to hunger and entirely related to the fact that in roughly 6 hours, she would enter the Belmont estate with Adrian Moretti. She gazed at the ceiling of her guest suite, still immaculate, still flawless, feeling more like a borrowed space than a place she lived, and struggled to regulate her breathing. Her phone vibrated on the bedside table, a message from Maya. "This is it. You've got this. Call me when it's over and tell me everything." Emily replied with a thumbs-up emoji. Forming actual words felt like an impossible task. She forced her body from the bed and into the shower's spray. The water was scalding, but she let it burn, the only anchor in a morning that felt adrift and unreal. When she stepped out 20 minutes later in a towel far softer than her own, Claudia stood waiting with a garment bag, her look implying Emily was already a disappointment. "The mister wants you downstairs in 30 minutes, Claudia announced, hooking the bag on the closet. "Hair and makeup arrive in 10. I can do my own, Mr. Moretti insists." Of course he would. The next 3 hours were spent being molded by strangers who offered only commands. The stylist wove her dark hair into an intricate design with a French name she would never recall. The makeup artist spoke only of palettes and undertones, debating if her skin was cool or warm. No one asked how she felt. No one questioned if she was afraid. No one saw the woman beneath the powder and silk standing at the edge of a cliff. When they were done, her own reflection was a stranger. This woman in the mirror was expensive, controlled, a person who moved in circles of power, not one who filed papers in an office that smelled of stale coffee and failure. The midnight blue dress fit her precisely as Adrian had sworn it would, as if molded to her form, which it likely was. Its neckline was tasteful, the fabric flowing like liquid night. The entire effect was of an understatement that cost more than her car. She was still mesmerized when his reflection joined hers in the mirror. He had changed from breakfast. In place of casual clothes, he wore a charcoal gray suit, cut by someone who knew that style was armor and presentation was a battlefield. His dark hair was swept back, his jaw cleanly shaven. When his gaze met hers in the glass, a jolt shot down her spine. "You look perfect," he murmured. "I look terrified." "That too," he conceded. He closed the distance between them, his cologne filling the air around her, something like dark wood and danger. "They will not see that. They will only see what we command them to see." Emily turned. "What if I ruin this?" "You will not." "You can't know that." "I do." Adrian's hand rose, adjusting the pendant at her throat, the same touch as 3 days ago, but now infinitely more intimate. His fingers grazed her collarbone, stealing her breath. "Emily, look at me!" She met his eyes. "You have spent 2 weeks preparing for this," Adrian said, his voice a low, steady current. "You know how to enter that room. You know their language. You know how to make Nathaniel Ashford ache with regret. All you must do is remember you aren't pretending. You are becoming who you were before the doubt." "And who is that?" "Someone who no longer needs him." The word settled in her chest, like a key turning in a long rusted lock. She wanted to believe him. She wanted this woman in the mirror to be real. She needed the confidence she'd practiced to be more than just borrowed armor, due for return once the night was over. But standing so near to Adrian, feeling the sheer weight of his attention, Emily no longer knew what was real. "The car is here," he said, stepping away, shattering the delicate tension between them. "Are you prepared?" "No, not in the slightest." "Yes," Emily lied. The drive to the Belmont estate consumed an hour, a silent journey for her as Adrian took calls in what sounded like Italian. His tone was clipped and final, discussing business that demanded absolute secrecy. For the past 2 weeks, she had successfully avoided asking about Adrian's world. It was not for a lack of curiosity, which buzzed constantly beneath the surface. It was a cold understanding that knowing more would make it impossible to leave when their arrangement concluded, and leaving was the contract. The estate appeared around a bend, a vision from another century. Manicured grounds surrounded a mansion that seemed torn from the European countryside. A line of gleaming, expensive cars snaked up the drive, catching the last of the day's sun. Emily's hands began to tremble. Adrian ended his call, his eyes finding hers. "Breathe." "I am." "No, you're gasping. It's different." He reached over, taking her hand in his. It was the first time he had touched her without it being part of the training. His palm was warm, his hold firm yet gentle. "Emily, we will walk in there, we will be seen, we will show them precisely what is required, and then we will be gone. That is all." "What if they ask about us, how we met?" "We will tell them the truth." Emily could only stare. The truth. Not all of it, just the parts that serve the purpose. Adriana's thumb stroked her knuckles, a gesture that could have been deliberate comfort or pure accident. "We were introduced by mutual friends. We have been seeing each other for a few months. We value our privacy. If they persist, we redirect. You have rehearsed this. Rehearsing in a living room is nothing like performing for people who are praying for my downfall." "Then do not fall." The simplicity of it was almost absurd. Don't fail. As if she could just choose not to crumble under the memory of Nathaniel's dismissal, not to feel like a fraud in a borrowed life. But Adrian still held her hand, his gaze filled with a certainty she could not find in herself. So Emily nodded. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay." The driver opened her door. Adrian exited first, then turned, offering his hand. She took it, allowing his help, not because she needed it, but because it was part of the theater, part of the story they were selling. At least that was the reason she gave herself. The entrance bustled with guests in fine attire, exchanging hollow compliments and air kisses. Emily saw faces she knew from her time with Nathaniel, fundraisers and galas where smiles were masks. The moment they began to climb the steps, she felt the atmosphere shift. It was not subtle. Conversations faltered, heads turned. A whisper sparked, and suddenly she felt 100 eyes on her, cataloging, judging, and condemning before she even crossed the threshold. Her body screamed to shrink, to look away, to become small instead. She straightened her spine, her hand secure in Adriana's. As they entered, the change in energy was a physical force. People stared, and then a woman she vaguely recalled from Nathaniel's family, some aunt or cousin, approached with a smile that never touched her eyes. "Emily, what a marvelous surprise! We weren't aware you would be attending." The subtext was a blade. "You should be at home, broken." Emily matched the woman's smile with her own. "I wouldn't have missed it. While Nathaniel and I are no longer together, I will always wish him happiness." The woman's gaze shifted to Adrian, her curiosity sharp. "And this is?" "Adrian Moretti," he said, his offered hand and easy confidence suggesting a lifetime of such encounters. "A pleasure." The woman took his hand, her expression turning from inquisitive to guarded. "Moretti. That name is familiar. I am told that often." "And your connection to Emily?" "We met through mutual friends," Emily answered smoothly, the rehearsed line falling easily from her lips. "Several months ago." "How lovely. I am sure we will see you both inside. The service begins in 20 minutes. The woman departed before a reply was possible, already turning to murmur to her companion. Emily let out a slow breath. That was not so difficult. "That was the overture," Adrian said softly. "The trial begins when you see him." Emily had fought that thought, refusing to imagine seeing him after 3 months of a deep, cutting silence, how he would look, or if he would even acknowledge she existed at all. They entered the main hall, a space utterly transformed into a scene from a bridal magazine. An abundance of flowers, immaculate rows of white chairs, and a number of candles that surely posed a fire risk. Attendees were already settling in, their hushed chatter somehow filling the entire room. Emily and Adrian chose seats near the back, far enough to avoid notice but not so distant as to suggest they were hiding. Strategic placement, another of Adrian's lessons. The ceremony commenced precisely on schedule. Music began to play. The bridesmaids, in their identical lavender gowns, started their procession. And then, at the front of the room, Nathaniel materialized, appearing exactly as Emily remembered him. Tall, conventionally handsome, with his blonde hair and blue eyes, and flashing a smile that was likely potent with voters and donors. Anyone who didn't know the man behind it. He was smiling that smile now, his gaze fixed on the aisle, anticipating his bride. A knot formed in Emily's chest. It wasn't heartbreak. She had already endured that phase. This was a quieter, different pang, like studying an old photo of a person you barely knew anymore. The bride appeared, and the groom did the requisite sharp intake of breath. She was stunning in the flawless, suitable way of political daughters, wearing a gown that likely exceeded the cost of Emily's student debt. She glided down the aisle with flawless posture, her smile perfectly fixed. Upon reaching Nathaniel, he clasped her hand as if he had waited his entire existence for her. Perhaps he had. Adrian's hand found Emily's beneath her dress, his fingers intertwining with hers in a gesture that felt increasingly familiar, grounding and true. She returned the squeeze. The ceremony unfolded just as Emily anticipated. Conventional, tedious, and filled with declarations of love and devotion that sounded hollow from two people marrying for political gain, not genuine emotion. The officiant spoke of partnership, dedication, and the choice to love each other daily. Emily found herself questioning if Nathaniel and his new wife had truly chosen one another, or if their path had been dictated by parents, advisors, and others who valued appearances over joy. When the officiant asked for objections, a profound silence fell over the room, suggesting many considered it, but none were foolish enough to speak. Emily remained silent. 20 minutes later, the ordeal was done. Nathaniel kissed his wife. The crowd applauded, and the newlyweds proceeded back up the aisle as a string quartet played a tune Emily faintly recalled from a long-forgotten film. As he passed their row, Nathaniel's gaze locked with hers. For one fleeting moment, time seemed to stand still. He saw her. He saw Adrian beside her, and he registered Emily's composure, poised, upright, not crumbling as he might have anticipated. A flicker of something crossed his face, perhaps surprise, or recognition, or an emotion Emily couldn't place. Then he was gone, moving on to the reception, already directing his smile at someone new. Emily exhaled, realizing she had been holding her breath. "Are you all right?" Adrienne murmured. "I'm not yet sure." The reception took place in a ballroom that dwarfed the ceremony hall. It featured crystal chandeliers, vast windows overlooking the gardens, and table settings with china that likely cost more per piece than Emily's weekly earnings. The decor was a sea of white and gold, a stark reminder that their hosts possessed wealth beyond imagination. Emily and Adrienne were placed at a table on the room's periphery, distant from the main table's speeches, but still in plain sight. It was another strategic move. With Adrienne, everything was strategic. Their table mates were strangers, likely donors or business partners, who offered polite smiles but little genuine conversation. Emily was thankful. She lacked the stamina for any more performance than was required. Dinner arrived in a succession of courses that seemed to materialize without being ordered. Emily merely toyed with her food, acutely aware of her own racing pulse and the periodic glances from other tables, where guests would lean in to whisper to one another. "They're watching us," she said softly. "Let them." Adrienne, completely unfazed, took a drink of wine. "That is the objective." I thought the objective was proving to Nathaniel that I had moved on. It is. And a component of moving on is embracing their curiosity, allowing them to speculate about who you are now, who I am, and what we are doing here. He placed his glass down, his eyes meeting hers. "Do you want to know what they are thinking?" "I don't think I do." "They are thinking you've changed, that you are with a man they do not know, and that perhaps they misjudged you." His voice was a low murmur meant only for her. "They are thinking that Nathaniel Ashford may have made an error." Emily yearned to believe him, to accept that the whispers were about her newfound strength and not her audacity for simply being there. But after so many years of feeling unseen, she couldn't trust that anyone was truly looking at her now. The music began for dancing after the meal. The bride and groom shared their perfectly executed first dance, one they had likely practiced endlessly. Afterward, the dance floor welcomed everyone else. Music flooded the grand room. Bodies swayed together. From the security of her chair, Emily observed, trying to quell the trembling in her hands. Adrian rose and held out his hand to her. "Dance with me." It was not a request. Emily looked up at this man, the one who had spent 2 weeks training her to be someone new, and felt a surge of panic. "I'm not sure we covered this." "We rehearsed in your apartment, and now we rehearse in a grand ballroom filled with an audience expecting us to be a couple. So dance with me." Emily accepted his hand. A refusal would have attracted more notice. Adrian guided her to the floor with his typical controlled elegance, finding a spot in the crowd's center, visible but not the main attraction. His hand came to rest on her waist, while hers found his shoulder, and just like that they were in motion, swaying to a melody she could barely discern over the thrum of her own heart. "You are stiff," Adrian observed. "I am terrified of dancing, of all this, of being present, with everyone's eyes on us, of—" She cut herself off before she could say it. "Of falling for you, of forgetting that none of this is real." Adrian drew her a fraction closer, erasing the space between them until Emily could feel his body's warmth through her gown's delicate fabric. "Do you know what I see when I look at you right now? Someone faking confidence. Someone who stopped faking it about 3 days ago." His voice was soft, intimate, making her skin prickle. "You are still waiting for someone to grant you permission to become the person you are, Emily. But that permission will never come. You have to claim it yourself." Before Emily could form a reply, she detected movement at the edge of her vision. Nathaniel and his bride were dancing close by, near enough for their conversation to be overheard. She had no desire to listen, yet Nathaniel's gaze found hers regardless, holding it for a second too long before he glanced away. "He's watching you," Adrian murmured. "I know." "How does that feel?" Emily mulled over the question. A month prior, the answer would have been crushing. It would have destroyed the last vestiges of her dignity, leaving her emotionally exposed on this pristine ballroom floor. But now, held in Adrian's arms, in a dress that cost a fortune, she experienced something else entirely. She felt a void, no sense of triumph, no contentment, not even a spark of rage, just an absolute emptiness. "It feels like I'm looking at a stranger," she finally said. Adrian's hand on her waist tightened almost imperceptibly. "Good." They danced through 2 more numbers before Emily needed to escape. She excused herself and headed for the terrace, stepping out into the crisp night air that had finally settled into autumn. The gardens were illuminated by fairy lights and paper lanterns, which cast warm glows in the encroaching dark. She had perhaps 30 seconds of solitude before she was joined, but it wasn't Adrian. "Emily." She pivoted to find herself looking at Nathaniel for the first time in 3 months. He appeared unchanged, sounded the same, and even offered the identical smile he had given her 1,000 times while they were engaged. Warm, yet not quite reaching his eyes. Sincere, but meticulously controlled. "I was not certain you would make it," he said. Emily met his gaze directly. "You sent an invitation." "I am aware. I assumed you might not wish to." "Why would I not wish to come?" The query seemed to take him by surprise. "Emily, I was the one who broke off our engagement. I chose another bride. Most in your place would have refused the invitation." "I'm not most people." "No." His glance drifted to the ballroom, searching for his new wife. "No, you aren't. There's something different about you. Thank you." "That wasn't praise," he clarified. A chill settled deep inside her. Then what was it? He moved nearer, his tone dropping to a whisper, an observation. "You arrive with a stranger in a gown worth 6 months of your salary, pretending the 2 years we planned a life together meant nothing. It's troubling." "Troubling?" "Yes. I'm worried for you, Em. I can't watch you make choices born of pain that you will later lament." That name, M, the one he had used for years, it struck her with the force of a blow. She had forgotten his particular brand of condescension, masked as kindness, that perfected skill of twisting worry into judgment. I appreciate the concern, Emily replied, her voice steady. But I'm well, better than well, in fact. And you? From my perspective, you seem desperate to make a point. I only want to ensure you aren't courting danger. Danger? Adrian Moretti. Nathaniel uttered the name as if it were poison. Do you have any idea who he is, or what he is capable of? I know precisely who he is. Then you understand he is not a man you should be near. Emily, you're a legal assistant in family court. You are not built to manage a man like him. It was so quintessentially Nathaniel, so assured in his judgment, so positive he understood her needs, that she nearly broke into laughter. This was the man she had adored, the one she'd intended to wed, standing before her on his own wedding day, declaring her unfit to choose her own path. You are correct, Emily said softly. I am not built to manage someone like Adrian. But perhaps that is the entire idea. Perhaps for 2 years I was precisely the woman you wanted me to be. Compliant, safe, and utterly fine. And it led me to nothing. So I am attempting a new way. I am selecting a different path. And your approval is no longer my concern. His features grew rigid. I am only trying to help. No, you are trying to soothe your conscience because I failed to shatter when you departed. You hoped I would be destroyed. You needed me to weep and prove that your absence was my ruin. Emily closed the distance, her gaze locked on his. But I did not. I am present. I am whole. And that fact disturbs you deeply. It's not true. It is, and for that I find I am thankful. Had you not broken our betrothal, I might never have seen how I had shrunk myself to occupy your world, how much I sacrificed to become your ideal instead of myself. So I thank you, Nathaniel. Thank you for taking another. You've done me a service. She moved to leave, but his hand shot out, grabbing her arm. Emily, wait! Release her! Adrian's voice sliced the darkness like steel. He materialized from the shadows, his swiftness implying he had witnessed everything. His grip enveloped Nathaniel's wrist, not with violence, but with a pressure that commanded Nathaniel to instantly let her go. We were merely speaking, Nathaniel managed, struggling for composure as his face paled. And now, the conversation is over. Adrian's voice remained low. It didn't have to be loud. The menace was coiled in each word, in his stance between them, in the chilling arithmetic of his gaze. You ought to return to your wife. She must be curious about your absence. Nathaniel seemed ready to protest, but a darkness in Adrian's eyes, a lethal seriousness, forced his retreat. He recoiled, adjusted his suit, and offered a strained, painful smile. Enjoy the evening, he said, his words aimed at Emily as he withdrew. He vanished back into the party, and Emily's knees buckled. Adrian studied her, his grip firm on her arms. Are you harmed? He asked. No, I'm fine. He only surprised me. He put his hands on you. His intention. I am not concerned with his intentions. Adrian's tone was quiet, measured, yet it held a new sharpness Emily had never known. A quality that was fiercely protective, proprietary, and lethal. No one lays a hand on you without your consent. Ever. She gazed up at him, this man who had accepted an absurd pact with a stranger, only to make it feel terrifyingly real as the fortress around her heart began to collapse. Adrian, we are going now. What? The party has barely begun. The party is irrelevant. You attended. You demonstrated that you are past him. You faced Nathaniel Ashford and delivered the necessary truth. The objective is complete." He clasped her hand, already striding for the door. "We will depart now, before my actions become tomorrow's news." Emily offered no resistance. She allowed him to guide her through the great hall, beyond the oblivious guests, past the lavish scenery and its hollow promise of joy. They reached the vehicle in less than 5 minutes, and as the car left the Belmont grounds, Emily finally found her breath. She gazed from the back window, watching the estate shrink into the distance, a world of light and sound she had nearly called her own, and felt the final chord to Nathaniel Ashford sever. It was finished. Truly over. She was a survivor. Adrian was on his phone, his quiet Italian sharp and transactional. Emily studied him in the car's gloom, noting the hard lines of his profile, the tightening of his jaw at displeasing news, the restrained power in his every gesture. This was the true Adrian Moretti, not the patient mentor of the past 2 weeks, not the charming partner who had held her on the dance floor. This was the architect of dynasties, founded on allegiance, terror, and measured gambles. Emily had consented to enter his domain for a single evening. Only it no longer felt like a single evening. It felt like a line had been crossed, a decision made irrevocable. She requested he teach her to endure, and he delivered. But she never imagined that to thrive in his reality meant she could no longer belong in her own. 30 minutes on, the car stopped at his residence. He concluded his call, facing her, his face a mask in the shadows. "Thank you," Emily whispered, "for all of it, for this. Do not thank me yet." A note in his voice sent her heart racing. "What are you saying?" Adrian studied her for a heavy moment, a complex emotion shifting in his gaze. He then exited the vehicle, extending a hand to her. "Come upstairs," he stated. "There are things to discuss." Her hands still shook as they entered the lift. She clasped them together, seeing the floors ascend to the top, intensely conscious of Adrian's silent presence. The space between them was altered now, electric with the feeling absent just 2 hours prior. Or perhaps it had been there all along, and she had simply been too consumed with endurance to see it. The lift opened straight into his penthouse. He strode in first, shrugging off his jacket and draping it on a chair with casual disregard for its probable $5,000 price. Emily entered behind him, adrift in a place that was known to her yet had never truly felt welcoming. "A drink?" Adrian offered, already at the bar. "I don't think I should." It wasn't a true question. He poured 2 tumblers of a rich amber liquid, approached, and placed one in her hand. "Sit before you collapse." Emily lowered herself to the sofa's edge, thankful for the command to cease her performance of being okay. Her feet throbbed from 6 hours in heels. Her head ached from the intricate pins in her hair. Yet beneath the bodily pain was a profound weariness, born not of flesh, but from the strain of witnessing her former love wed another while feigning indifference. She tasted the drink he offered. The burn was sharp but centering. Adrian stood still, gazing through the immense windows at the urban lights below. Sometime during the night he had loosened his tie and the first button of his shirt. Emily's eyes fixed on the sliver of exposed skin at his throat before she forced her gaze away. "You were magnificent tonight," he murmured, his back still to her. "I did nothing but stand there, praying my legs wouldn't give out. You confronted the man who broke you, declaring yourself whole. You danced before a crowd that was waiting for you to crumble. You kept your chin high when your every cell must have been screaming to flee." He pivoted to face her. "That is not nothing, Emily." It felt like nothing. It felt like I was an imposter, wearing someone else's skin. That's only because you're still waiting for someone to grant you ownership of your own life. Adrian sipped his drink, his gaze a physical weight on her. When will you accept that the woman you've become these past 2 weeks is not an act? This strength is not something I loaned you. It is you. It's the person you were before Nathaniel Ashford taught you how to shrink. Emily placed her glass on the table, her hand trembling. You can't know that. I can. Because for 14 days, I've witnessed you battle your own reflexes. I've watched you apologize for taking up space, for having a voice, for simply being in my home as if your presence were an intrusion. And with every apology, I had to remind you that permission was not required, that you were already complete. He moved, closing the distance to sit on the coffee table, their eyes now level. Do you understand the distinction between yourself and Nathaniel's new wife? Emily could only shake her head, her voice a traitor she couldn't trust. She understands her value, not through any inherent superiority, but because no one ever managed to convince her she was worthless. And that, Emily, can be yours. You can move through this world as if you belong to it, but you must stop seeking validation from others. His words landed with a force she hadn't anticipated. Something fractured deep in her chest, a part of her that had been sealed off since Nathaniel broke their vows, perhaps even longer. A burn of tears stung her eyes, and she fought them back fiercely. I don't know how, she whispered. Yes, you do. You proved it tonight. Now you just have to continue. Adrienne reached out, his fingers gently tucking a stray curl behind her ear, a tenderness so unexpected it seemed to defy everything she thought she knew about him. His hand lingered, his thumb a warm trace along her jaw, and Emily's breathing hitched. This was treacherous territory. This nearness, this current arcing between them, had nothing to do with their business arrangement and everything to do with the simple fact that she had spent 14 days falling for a man who was meant to be a footnote. And then his phone buzzed, shattering the fragile moment. Adrian retracted his hand, his expression shifting from gentle to guarded in a fraction of a second. He retrieved the phone, and as his eyes scanned the screen, his jaw hardened. I have to take this, he stated, already rising. Stay put. He strode to his office, a torrent of sharp Italian spilling from his lips before the door had even clicked shut. Emily was left alone in the vast silence, her pulse frantic, trying to decipher what had just transpired, or what had so nearly transpired. She raised her glass, draining it in a single sharp swallow that burned a welcome path down her throat. Then she rose, shed her heels, and walked toward the guest room. She had to escape this dress, scrub her face clean, and release her hair. She had to find herself again, even if she was no longer certain who that person was. The guest suite was an island of cold perfection, just as she'd left it. The bed immaculate, the bathroom sterile, everything in its precise place. In the reflection of the full-length mirror, Emily saw a stranger looking back. The woman was still polished, still someone who moved with ease through fundraisers and galas. Yet a new light flickered in her eyes, something that resembled resolve. Her hand was at the zipper of her dress when the sound came, a shout that sliced through the penthouse's supposedly impervious walls. Emily went rigid, her fingers frozen in place as she listened. The yelling went on. It was Adrian's voice, furious and authoritative, in the same rapid-fire Italian he used for his calls. But tonight there was an undercurrent she'd never heard before. A raw edge that sounded like fear. Before reason could stop her, Emily slipped out of the suite and moved silently toward Adrian's office. The door was ajar, and through the crack, she saw him pacing, phone clamped to his ear, his free hand raked through his hair, a gesture of a man whose control was rapidly unraveling. He barked a command into the phone. Emily knew no Italian, but she was fluent in tone, and his screamed that someone had made a catastrophic error. He ended the call, hurling his phone at the desk with a force that should have shattered it, and stood, hands braced on the wood, his entire body humming with tension. Emily knew she should have retreated, returned to her room, and feigned ignorance. Instead, she pushed the door open. Adrian's head snapped toward her. For a fleeting instant, she saw something primal in his gaze. Rage, despair, something darker that made her own blood run cold. Then the mask of indifference slammed down. "I told you to wait in the living room. I heard you yelling. And you decided to walk toward the fire. I thought you might need..." Her voice trailed off into uncertainty. "I don't know what." Adrienne let out a humorless laugh. "What I need is for people to follow a simple order. What I need," he continued, "is for my problems to remain solved, not to resurrect themselves the second I look away. What I need..." He cut himself off with a shake of his head. "You should go to bed, Emily. What's wrong?" "It's nothing that concerns you." "Adrian, I said it's nothing." His voice was a blade now. "This is not within the scope of our contract. You don't get to pry into my affairs. You don't get to stand there with that worried expression as if we're..." He faltered, his jaw tight as he battled with the words. "As if we're what?" Emily asked, her voice barely a whisper. "As if any of this is real." The words fell like shards of glass between them. A sharp pain twisted in Emily's chest, yet she held his gaze. "It feels real," she said softly, "because you need it to be. Because you're searching for a savior, and I foolishly let you believe I could be him." Adrian circled his desk, putting more space between them. "But that is not our reality. You had an issue. I provided a solution. The transaction is complete and we can resume our separate lives." "The transaction is complete," Emily repeated, the words feeling alien in her mouth. "Yes, you attended the wedding, you made your point, our business is concluded." "Just like that? Just like that?" Adrian refused to meet her eyes, his gaze fixed on a point over her shoulder, his face a neutral mask. "You can have the room tonight, but tomorrow you should return to your apartment. Now back to my life." The finality of it was like a physical blow. "You're kicking me out." "I am honoring the terms of our agreement. It's not the same." "Isn't it? Because it feels a lot like you're shoving me out the door the moment things became complicated." "Things are not complicated. They are precisely as they have always been. Temporary." "Liar." The word escaped her, sharp and damning. "You're lying, either to me or to yourself. I don't know which is worse. But you felt what I did tonight. In the car. In this room." "I felt nothing." Adrienne's voice was glacial. "You are inventing a narrative because you are wounded and alone and desperate for anyone to assign you value. But I'm not that man, Emily. I will not be your next bad decision." The cruelty of his words left her breathless. She stood there, wrapped in the gown he chose, armed with the confidence he had given her, and felt it all turn to dust around her. "You're right," she said, her voice quiet but clear. "You are not Nathaniel. You're far worse. He, at least, was honest about why I wasn't enough for him." She turned and walked away before he could utter another word. She made it to the guest suite, closing the door with a steady hand that betrayed none of her inner turmoil. Then she sank onto the bed and finally she wept. She wept for Nathaniel and a future that had vanished. She wept for the girl she was 2 weeks ago, who felt small and unseen and believed that was her fate. But most of all, she wept for Adrian, the man who saw her when no one else did and showed her how to be seen, only to cast her aside the instant she began to feel real to him. Sleep never came. She lay in the oppressive dark, tracking the faint sounds of the building. Sometime around 2 or maybe 3 in the morning, she heard his footsteps pause outside her door. They lingered for a long, heavy moment before moving on. She wondered if his night was as restless as hers. When dawn broke, Emily packed with a cold, robotic precision. The new clothes remained in the closet. The jewels he'd bought stayed on the nightstand. She took only what she came with: her phone, her wallet, and the grandmother's ring Adrian had refused. She was nearly at the exit when Claudia materialized, poised and perfect even at this hour. "Mr. Moretti has requested I have a car brought around for you," she said, her tone impeccably distant. "That won't be necessary. The subway is fine." "He insists." Emily met the housekeeper's gaze. "Tell Mr. Moretti that their business was concluded, that she required nothing further from him." She departed without awaiting Claudia's reply, rode the elevator to the ground floor, and walked into a morning sun that felt jarringly bright, obscenely ordinary for the chaos raging within her. The subway journey home stretched for 40 minutes. Emily saw only her own reflection against the darkened glass, the city lights smearing past as she retraced her path from a broken soul to a powerful woman, and finally to this utter devastation, all in the span of 2 weeks. Her apartment was a time capsule of her former life, small, chaotic, and laced with the faint smell of takeout from 3 weeks prior that had never been properly discarded. It was like stepping back into a skin she had already shed, an attempt to wear a life that no longer fit. Emily let her bag fall to the ground, sinking onto the worn fabric of her second-hand sofa. Her phone vibrated almost at once. It was Maya, likely waiting on edge for news since the night before. "How did it go? Give me every detail." Emily gazed at the text, grappling with how to distill the last 14 days into a few words. How could she convey that she'd struck a bargain with a formidable man, a deal that had succeeded beyond her wildest dreams, and had also shattered her in ways she had never anticipated? She composed and erased 3 separate replies before sending a starkly simple one. "It's done. I'll call you later." The remainder of her day was spent in a futile effort to reclaim the woman she used to be. She washed her clothes, she scoured the kitchen, she even powered on her laptop to face her work inbox, where 2 weeks of unread messages had piled up, a task for which she had no strength. Yet regardless of the chore, her mind circled back to Adrian. The look in his eyes in the living room, as if she were a treasure he felt compelled to shield. The way he had dismissed her in his office, as if she were a threat from which he had to flee. The undeniable way she had fallen for him against all better judgment. As twilight descended, a resolution formed in Emily's mind. There was no returning to the person she had been. That woman had vanished. Not because of Adrian, but because Emily had finally glimpsed her own potential when she ceased apologizing for her own existence. But she could not remain in this limbo, tormented by a man who had made his rejection painfully clear. She had to advance, She had to take the lessons Adrian had imparted and forge something that was hers alone, not his, not Nathaniel's, not anyone else's who presumed to measure her value. She was composing her letter of resignation. The thought of returning to the law firm where she'd been a ghost for 3 years was now unbearable when her phone buzzed. An unfamiliar number. Emily nearly ignored it, but a strange impulse made her answer. Emily Carter. A man's voice, a stranger's. Who is this? My name is Marco. I'm an associate of Adrian Moretti. He instructed me to contact you. Emily's pulse hammered to a halt. For what reason? There has been an incident. Mr. Moretti wanted to ensure you were aware that you may be approached by individuals asking about last night, about the wedding. Should that occur, he insists you phone this number at once and refuse to answer any of their inquiries. What sort of incident? I am not authorized to share specifics, but Mr. Moretti was emphatic that your security is a primary concern. My security? A chilling sensation spread through Emily's core. What is that supposed to mean? It means you must exercise caution, Miss Carter. And should you detect anything out of the ordinary, anyone shadowing you, anyone probing into your connection with Mr. Moretti, you're to call this number. Is that clear? Marco, what in God's name is happening? But the connection was already severed. Emily remained frozen on her couch, phone still pressed against her ear, struggling to absorb what she had just been told. Your security is a primary concern. Anyone shadowing you, refuse to answer inquiries. This was far from finished. Whatever Adrian was caught up in, the kind of enterprise that drove him to shout in Italian at 2 a.m, had now tangled her in its web. She had entered his orbit for a single evening, and now that orbit was pulling her down with it. Emily's hands trembled as she lowered the phone. She ought to have been gripped by fear, dialing the police or Maya or anyone who could promise her everything would be all right. Instead, an entirely different emotion surfaced. It was rage. Adrian had cast her aside, declared their arrangement terminated, and urged her to return to her own life, only to send his men to warn her of unexplained circumstances, unnamed perils, the fallout from a decision she'd made blind to the true cost. If he believed she would simply cower in her apartment, awaiting his permission to understand her own reality, he truly did not know her. Emily snatched her jacket and keys, making for the exit. She was without a strategy, with no idea what words she would use upon arrival, but she knew her destination with absolute certainty. The Crimson Lounge appeared altered by daylight, stripped of its mystery and rendered more functional, like a theater stage under harsh work lights. Emily approached the entrance where she had stood 3 weeks ago, clutching a velvet box and a reckless hope, and saw the same hostess standing guard. The woman's gaze sharpened with recognition. Miss Carter, I must see Adrian. Mr. Moretti is not receiving any guests today. That is irrelevant. Inform him that I am here. I regret that is not an option. Tell him, Emily insisted, her voice possessing a steely edge she'd never known, that if he refuses to see me this instant, I will proceed into that ballroom and begin asking very audible questions about the sort of business that necessitates safety warnings for its associates. I am certain your other clientele would be quite intrigued. The hostess's face remained a placid mask, but a subtle shift occurred in her eyes. Perhaps it was respect, or the understanding that Emily's threat was genuine. Please wait here. She vanished through the doors. Emily stood waiting, her heart thundering, half expecting Adrian to deny her entry. But 5 minutes later, the guard from her first visit emerged, beckoning her to follow. The journey to Adrian's office was at once familiar and strange. Emily had walked this path before, but as a diminished, more desperate version of herself. Now, she was simply furious. The guard rapped twice on the door and then stepped away. Emily did not wait for an invitation. She thrust the door open and strode inside. Adrian was positioned by the window, just as he had been the night before, gazing out over the metropolis. He did not pivot as she entered. "You should not have come here," he stated. "I received a rather curious call from a man named Marco. He mentioned my security was a priority. Care to elaborate on what that entails?" "It entails precisely what he said. That is not a sufficient answer. It is the only answer you will receive." Emily closed the distance between them until she stood directly behind him, near enough to see his faint reflection in the window. He appeared exhausted, beyond exhausted. He looked as if he hadn't slept, as if he'd spent the entire night waging invisible wars. "What took place at the wedding?" she demanded. "Nothing that is your affair." Marco seemed to believe it was. Marco was exercising prudence. Adrian, enough. Emily moved to face him, compelling him to meet her gaze. "Stop handling me as if I'm some delicate object that must be shielded from reality. You dedicated 2 weeks to teaching me how to be formidable, how to confront my fears, how to stand my ground. Do not stand there now and instruct me to go home and act as though none of this is real." Adrian's jaw clenched. "You cannot grasp what you are demanding. Then help me to grasp it. I am unable." "For what reason?" "Because the less you are aware of, the more insulated you are from harm." A sharp, bitter laugh escaped Emily. "That's a rich statement from the one who pulled me into this dark world. You involved me in this, Adrian. The instant you consented to attend that wedding, the instant you schooled me in how to move and speak and command a room like I belonged, you made me a component of whatever this is. So do not pretend you are shielding me by excluding me. You are only shielding yourself. You are correct." Adrian's tone was flat, devoid of all feeling. "I am shielding myself because allowing you any nearer would be the most foolish act I could possibly commit. Why? Because every person I permit into my life ends up dead or gone or cursing the day they ever met me. Because this world, the one you fantasize about joining, utterly demolishes people, and you have been demolished enough for one lifetime." The brutal candor of his words struck Emily silent. She studied Adrian, truly studied him, and saw beyond the tailored suits and the restrained menace and the fortress he had built around himself. She saw the man beneath it all, the one who had offered his aid to a complete stranger because he knew the sting of being unseen. The man who had spent 2 weeks training her to survive because perhaps in some hidden corner of his soul, he was still learning how to survive himself. "What happened at the wedding?" she repeated, her voice softer now. Adrian pivoted away from her, his hands pressing against the cool glass of the window frame. For a long, tense moment, he remained silent. Then, at last, he spoke. "Someone made an attempt on my life." The statement landed on Emily like a physical impact. "What?" "Not inside the ceremony. Afterward, as we were departing, a vehicle trailed us from the estate. 3 men. They would have finished the job if my driver had not been alert and diverted to another road." He met her reflection in the window. "The phone call I received when we returned, that was my security chief informing me they had located the men who were sent, informing me that someone had placed a bounty on my head so high that it was making people careless. But you are all right. I am unharmed. You're unharmed. Everyone is unharmed. His voice was laced with poison, but now the one who called for my blood knows I was at that gala, knows you were on my arm, which makes you their leverage. Emily felt a tremor run through her legs. Leverage, a pressure point to exploit, a weakness to be broken. Adrian finally turned to meet her gaze. That was the reason for Marco's call, the reason I told you to leave. Because the second you entered my world, you were marked and I cannot. His voice frayed. I can't shield you when standing beside me puts you in danger. So I'm just to go home and pray they forget me. Yes. And should they not, you'll take care of it? Emily just shook her head. Do you honestly believe I will hide in my apartment waiting for you to manage this? After everything you've shown me, you think I'll just return to being invisible? That is precisely what I think. Because the alternative is seeing you harmed on my account, and I will not permit that. You don't have the right to choose for me. I do, when my conflict is what threatens you. Emily closed the space between them, so near she could see the bone-deep exhaustion in his eyes, the tension coiled in his shoulders, the sheer will holding him together. Tell me one thing, she said softly. When you sent me away last night, was it truly because our pact was over, or were you already trying to shield me from this? Adrian gave no reply. He didn't need to. The truth was written plainly on his face. I'm not leaving, Emily stated. I won't go back to my apartment and hide. I refuse to act like the past 2 weeks never occurred. You drew me into your world, Adrian, and now I'm your problem. Emily, no! You don't get to send me away for my own safety. You don't get to declare me too weak to face what's real. I'm standing in your office aware someone tried to murder you, and I am not running. So either tell me everything, or I will walk through that door and find someone who will. For a long moment, Adrian simply stared at her. Then impossibly, a smile formed. The same sharp, cold smile from their first meeting, though somehow it held more warmth now. You're completely insane, he said. I was taught by the master. He shook his head, but Emily saw his resolve beginning to fracture. She could see him calculating the risks, weighing the possibilities, deciding if letting her in was worth the terrible price. Finally, he spoke. If I tell you, if I pull you all the way into this, there is no turning back. You realize that? I realize it. You will know things that make you an accomplice, that will make you as much a part of this as I am. Good. Adrienne covered the distance between them in 2 strides. His hand rose to cup her jaw, his thumb brushing her cheekbone, an echo from the night before. Last chance to turn back, he said, his voice low. Emily met his stare. I'm not turning back. Then you stay close, because things are about to become incredibly dangerous, and I have to know you are ready. I am ready. We shall see. He let his hand fall and moved to his desk, pulling out a phone to place a call. Upon an answer, he spoke again in rapid Italian. Orders, Emily guessed from the tone. He finished the call and looked at her. Marco will be bringing your things from your apartment. You will stay here until this is over. Adrian, it's not a negotiation. If you are a part of this, you play by my rules. And rule 1 is you do not leave my sight until I am certain you are safe. Emily fought the urge to argue. She wanted to tell him she didn't require his protection, that she could handle herself. But the reality was, she was walking into the unknown. She had no idea who wanted Adrian dead, or why, or what they would do if they learned of her. And so she simply nodded. Okay. Adrian watched her for another beat, then said, "You asked about the wedding. The truth is, I've been in a war with another organization for the better part of a year. Disputes over territory, disagreements on how to conduct business, the usual things. But lately it has escalated. They began targeting my people, and I have responded in kind. Last night was a message from them that no place is sacred, not even a senator's son's wedding. And now they are aware of me. Now they are aware I had a companion. Whether they know your identity or what you are to me is not yet clear, but I am taking no risks. What you are to me." The words hung in the space between them, unspoken yet deafening. "What is the next move?" Emily asked. "The next move? We end this. I find the person who gave the order. I ensure they comprehend what occurs when they target what is mine. And I will stop this war before anyone else is harmed." "How?" Adrian's smile became predatory. "By doing what I am best at, making people regret they ever underestimated me." He moved past her to the door, then paused and glanced back. "Are you certain about this, Emily? Because when we step out of this room together, the pretense is over, the performances end. This all becomes real." Emily envisioned her apartment, small, secure, and suffocating. She envisioned the law firm where for 3 years she was a ghost. She envisioned the life she'd assembled that never felt like her own. Then she envisioned the last 2 weeks of learning to exist, of facing Nathaniel and feeling nothing, of falling for a dangerous man who saw her when she was invisible. "I'm certain," she said. Adrian held out his hand. Emily took it, and together they stepped out into the war. The war room, as Adrian referred to it, was in the basement of the Crimson Lounge, a place Emily never knew of until he guided her to a service elevator, needing a key card and a fingerprint to operate. The room itself was nothing but concrete and steel, lined with monitors displaying security feeds from what appeared to be a dozen locations across the city. 3 men were already present when they entered, their conversation halting the instant Adrian appeared with Emily beside him. Marco was easy to spot, being the one who moved forward at once, his eyes flashing to Emily with poorly hidden concern before he focused on Adrian. "Boss," he said, "we have an issue." "When do we not have an issue?" Adrian walked to the main monitor, taking in what was displayed. "What am I seeing?" "Security feed from the Belmont estate. This is from last night, roughly 20 minutes after your departure." Marco hit a key and the view zoomed in on a part of the parking lot. 3 men were standing near a black sedan, talking. One of them took out a phone, made a call, then all 3 entered the car and left. "They're the same men that followed you. We tailed their vehicle to a warehouse on the east side. By the time our team arrived, they had vanished. But you recovered something. We found confirmation they were there, and we found this." Marco offered Adrian a folder. "Surveillance photos. It seems they've been observing you for at least 2 weeks." Adrian opened the folder, his face impassive as he flipped through what seemed to be dozens of pictures. Emily could not see them well from where she stood, but she saw flashes. Adrian leaving the Crimson Lounge, Adrian getting into his car, Adrian entering his building, Adrian with Emily. There were no less than 4 pictures of them together, leaving for the wedding, walking the Belmont grounds, dancing, and 1 shot through the window of Adrian's penthouse, showing them in the living room on the night they returned. Emily's stomach plummeted. "They were watching us." "They were watching me," Adrian corrected, his voice sharp. "You were just collateral." "Same thing." Emily moved in closer, looking over his shoulder at the photos. In every single one, she appeared completely unaware, smiling, talking, living in Adriana's world with no idea that someone was documenting her every moment. For how long have they been at this? Long enough to map your routine, your home, your work, who you speak with. Marco's voice was apologetic yet firm. I apologized, Miss Carter. We were not aware they had widened their surveillance until we recovered these. Who are they? Emily asked. Who is orchestrating this? The three men exchanged a look. Adrian put the folder down and turned to her. His name is Vincent Calabrazzi. He controls the East Side. Gambling, protection rackets, some import venture that is likely not as legitimate as he suggests. We maintained a truce for years. He stayed on his side. I stayed on mine. Everyone profited. Adrian's jaw clenched. 6 months ago, that truce shattered. One of his crew ventured into my territory, started putting pressure on businesses that were under my protection. I made it understood that was unacceptable. He made it understood he was indifferent. Things worsened. How much worse? People were hurt. Property was destroyed. Lines were crossed that should never have been. Adrienne met her gaze. I'm not going to lie to you, Emily, and claim to be innocent in this. I've done things to Calabrazzi's operation that would make you leave this room, but he has done far worse. And now he believes the path to victory is to make this personal. By coming for me at a wedding, in a place I thought secure, filled with civilians, politicians, people who are not part of this life. Adriana's voice became ice. That was not the way of things. A code existed, lines etched in stone that were never to be crossed, and he had violated every last one. The words settled over Emily as she tried to merge the image of her mentor with the man before her now, one who spoke of territory and rules written in blood. What is your next move? She whispered. To finish it. Adrienne's focus shifted to Marco. Do we have a fix on Calabrazzi? He's been a ghost, using a network of safe houses, gone by morning, but we have a good feeling about tomorrow night. Marco cast a new image onto the screen. A lone warehouse in a forgotten industrial park. A shipment is arriving. Merchandise of a high value he will need to witness with his own eyes. Our informant puts him there between 8 and midnight. And this informant is solid as they come. He's one of Calabrazzi's own men, a lieutenant who has soured on the new direction of the organization. Adrian stared into the grainy picture, lost in thought. How many men will be with him? Our best estimate is 10, maybe 12, not counting the muscle already there for the shipment. We'll be outnumbered then. We are always outnumbered. That fact has never deterred us. A cruel curve touched Adrian's lips, a hunter's grin, not a smile. Prepare everyone. I want full combat attire, non-lethal force where possible, and surveillance on all exits. If Calabrazzi even thinks of running, I want to know before his hand touches the car door. And Miss Carter? Emily's voice cut through the tactical coldness before Adrian could answer. I am going with you. 4 pairs of eyes locked onto her. Adrian's expression morphed from a strategist's focus to sheer disbelief. That is out of the question. You told me I was involved now. That means I don't wait in your tower while you wage a war in my name. That is precisely what it means. No, it means I decide for myself what dangers I am willing to face. Emily folded her arms, her gaze unwavering. You're hunting the man who tried to have you taken out. The monster who has been stalking us for 2 weeks. I have a right to witness the end of this. You have a right to breathe, which you won't be doing if you stumble into a firefight with hardened killers. Then show me how to survive." For a long, silent moment, Adrien just stared. Then he looked at Marco. "Leave us." Marco and his men vanished without a word, the door clicking shut behind them. A crushing silence descended. "Emily," Adrienne's voice was a tightly leashed thing. "I grasp your need to be a part of this. I see that you feel you're owed some kind of justice or closure or whatever you hope to find out there in the darkness tomorrow. But this is not the wedding. This isn't some social play where the worst that happens is a cruel remark. People will be harmed, perhaps fatally, and my focus must be on ending the threat, not on keeping you from catching a stray bullet." "I understand that." "Do you? Because from my perspective, you seem to view this as an adventure, failing to grasp the deadly reality of it all." The word struck her, a sharp, unfair sting. Emily felt the old walls rise, the instinct to retreat and apologize, to make herself small. But 2 weeks under his tutelage had been spent tearing those walls down. She wouldn't rebuild them now. "I am not treating this like an adventure," she stated quietly. "I'm treating it as the consequence of my own decision. I chose to come to you for aid. I chose to attend that wedding by your side. I chose to be here now rather than retreat home. And I am choosing to see this through to its conclusion. Not for a thrill, but because hiding while you clean up my chaos is no longer who I am. This is not your chaos. It became my chaos the instant those pictures were taken, the moment Calabresi saw me as a weapon against you." Emily stepped closer, near enough to see the profound weariness carved into his face. "You can't shield me by locking me away, Adrian. You can only shield me by arming me. So I'm asking you, arm me." Adrian's eyes slid shut, and in that instant, he seemed far older than his 35 years, burdened by a fatigue that ran soul deep. When he looked at her again, resignation warred with a flicker of something like pride. "You won't be swayed on this, will you?" "No, not even if I explain that it is the most reckless choice you could possibly make." She saw the ghost of a smile as he shook his head. "Fine. But you will obey my commands to the letter. No improvisation, no heroics. You do not know better than the veterans who live this life. Is that clear? Crystal. And if I give the order to run, you run. No looking back, no hesitation. You simply get away. Deal." A flicker of doubt crossed Emily's face. Every fiber of her being screamed to refuse, to promise she would never abandon him. But his eyes told her this was the price of admission, the only term he would accept. "Deal," she conceded. Adrian raised his phone to his ear. "Marco, return, and bring someone who can teach defensive tactics the next 6 hours." The next 6 hours were the most grueling of Emily's existence. The instructor Marco produced was a woman named Sophia, compact and coiled with a quiet lethality that promised she could end you without a second thought. She asked no questions about the impossible timeline for this lesson in survival. She just began. They started with the fundamentals: how to hold her ground, how to shift her weight, how to turn an attacker's own force against them. Sophia was a relentless instructor, offering no praise, only correction when Emily erred, and no sympathy when she hit the mats for the 10th time. "Again," Sophia commanded, not even breathing hard while Emily fought for air. "An arm seizes you from behind." "Your move," Emily fought to recall the steps. "Drop your center, pivot into the hold, strike with the elbow." Her execution was clumsy. Too slow. She announced the move before it even began. Sophia deflected it effortlessly. Too predictable. They will anticipate it and counter. You must seem to yield until the very moment you strike. Again. For 3 hours they drilled. When Sophia finally permitted a pause, Emily's body was a canvas of pain, bruises forming upon bruises. Yet she could now break from a hold on instinct, spot a weakness in a grip, move in ways that might grant her precious, fleeting seconds. It wasn't enough, she knew. It would never be enough. But it was more than nothing. Adrian materialized in the doorway as she tried to catch her breath, his expression unreadable. "What's the verdict?" he asked Sophia. "She learns quickly. She'll never win a fight. But she might just survive one long enough to escape." Sophia tossed Emily a water bottle. "Drill those escapes. Your muscles will remember when your mind goes blank." Then she was gone. Emily drained half the bottle before turning to Adrian. "Be honest. Will I be a liability tomorrow?" "In all likelihood, yes." He crossed the room, erasing the space between them. "But I would rather have you where I can watch you than wonder if you are safe somewhere else. This way, if the worst happens, I will know." That offers little comfort. It wasn't meant to. Adrienne reached up, brushing a damp strand of hair from her face. The gesture was growing familiar, an intimacy that made Emily's heart race despite the bone-deep ache. "Emily, you can still back out of this. You can remain here while we deal with Calibra, and no one would fault you for it. I would fault myself." "Why?" "For being wise enough to avoid a situation that could end your life? Because I am done being a spectator while others take all the risks." Emily put the bottle down, her eyes meeting his. "My whole life has been a study in caution, in safety, in choices designed to cause no ripples, to attract no attention." "And what was my reward?" "An engagement to a man who found me forgettable. A career where I was invisible. A home that felt less like a life and more like a waiting room. And you believe embracing this danger will change that?" "I believe choosing my own danger is better than having safety forced upon me by those who do not care what I truly desire." Emily moved in closer until she could feel the heat radiating from his very skin. "You showed me this. You showed me I could be a person who demands space, who is not an apology walking through a room. So do not ask me to become small again, simply because it is the safer path." Adriana's hand lifted to her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with that impossible gentleness, a stark contrast to the storm that was his life. "You will get yourself killed," he murmured. "Not if you teach me how not to die." "I'm trying. You refuse to listen." "Then make me." The air between them crackled, alive with unspoken things. Emily saw the conflict waging in his eyes, the protector who wanted her locked away versus the man who understood her rebellion. The instinct to push her away fought the need to pull her closer, and the need won. Adrian closed the final inch between them, and his mouth crashed down on hers. It held no tenderness, no caution or care that a first kiss is meant to have. It was a raw, desperate claiming, and it tasted of the beautiful violence he carried inside him. Emily returned his kiss with a matching fire, her fingers twisting into the fabric of his shirt as her whole being ignited, as if starved for this very touch since their first meeting. When they parted for air, breaths ragged, Adrian pressed his brow to hers. "This is a profound mistake," he breathed. "Probably. You need to leave now before this deepens." A genuine laugh, not the sharp, cold sound he usually wielded, escaped him. Too late. Yes, far too late. They lingered in the fragile space between who they were and who they were about to become. Then the shrill buzz of Adriana's phone shattered the spell. He withdrew, glancing at the screen as the mask of business slid back into place. Marco has the final parameters for tomorrow. We need to review them. All right. A phantom warmth still lingered on Emily's lips, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs, but she willed herself into focus. What must I know? It turned out she needed to know all of it. For the next 2 hours, they stood in the war room as Marco detailed the operation with chilling efficiency. The warehouse, situated on the east side, was remote enough to prevent civilian harm, yet offered multiple avenues of escape. Calabrizzi's cargo was due at 8. Marco's informant swore he would be there to personally supervise. Adrian's strategy was brutally simple: encircle the building, seal all exits, and force a confrontation on their own ground. In a perfect world, Calabrizzi would recognize his disadvantage and capitulate peacefully. In the real world, a battle was all but certain. Emily's part in this was deceptively straightforward. Remain in the vehicle with Marco, stay concealed, and under no condition was she to exit the car without a direct command. It was the careful compromise Adrian had demanded. She could witness the storm, but not stand in its path. Emily consented, having no alternative but a cold certainty settled in her gut. No strategy ever truly survives first contact with the enemy. The remainder of the night bled away in tense readiness as Adrian's operatives materialized in silent waves. Strangers to Emily, all moving with a fluid, terrifying competence born of long practice. They methodically checked their weapons, confirmed tactical points, and debated contingencies for outcomes Emily dared not even visualize. Through it all, Adrian was an island of calm, the consummate builder of empires now constructing a fortress of belief. He was making them believe this would succeed, that they could stride into Calabrizzi's den and emerge unscathed. Emily desperately wanted to believe him. As darkness fell, she was sent to Adrian's penthouse under strict orders to rest. She tried. In the guest suite that now felt like a cage, she closed her eyes and fought to silence the riot in her mind. It was useless. At midnight, she surrendered, finding Adrian in his office, awash in files, looking as haunted by the same sleepless specter as she felt. Sleep won't come, he murmured, not lifting his gaze. Tomorrow is all I can think about. Welcome to the fold? He set aside the document he was holding and nodded toward a chair. What troubles you? Everything and nothing. The kiss that hung unspoken between them. The fact that in less than 12 hours she would be trapped in a car while the man she was falling for walked toward a loaded gun. The endless ways this night could fracture into tragedy. What if Calabrizzi refuses to surrender? Emily whispered. Then we compel him. And if you can't, Adrian's face turned to stone. Then he will not leave that warehouse breathing. The raw finality of his words should have horrified her, should have made her flinch, a stark reminder that the man before her was capable of a violence she could barely imagine. Instead, a profound weariness washed over Emily. Have you ever taken a life? She asked softly. Adrian's eyes met hers for a long, heavy moment. Yes. How many? Does the number change anything? It might. He settled back, his gaze analytical. I have killed 4 men. 3 were in the process of trying to kill me or someone I was defending. The 4th was an individual who hurt a child under my care and believed his wealth could erase the crime. His voice was clinical, devoid of emotion. There is no pleasure in it, no pride, but I do not lose sleep over it. Their decisions led them to that point, and I made the choice to bring it to an end. That is the world I inhabit. And tomorrow, if Calabrese forces my hand, I will do what is necessary to shield my people, to shield you, and then I will continue on, just as I always have. Emily absorbed his words, struggling to reconcile the man who had kissed her just 6 hours prior with this one, calmly contemplating the act of killing. They should have been two separate beings, yet they were one. Adrian was a universe of contradictions, protector and predator, mentor and executioner, the man who saw her when no one else did, and the man who could extinguish a life without a second thought. And she was falling for every last part of him. I don't know how to be someone who is okay with this, Emily confessed. You don't need to be okay with it. You only need to decide if you can live beside it. Adrienne rose, circled the desk, and knelt before her, meeting her gaze. I told you this world breaks people, Emily. I was not being poetic. If you remain, if you choose me, you choose all that I am, the violence, the risk, the moral shadows that will haunt your sleep. I cannot promise it will become easier. I can only promise to be truthful about the price. What is the price for you? The question seemed to unmoor him. His gaze shifted, jaw tight, before he answered, his voice low. Everything I could have become had I chosen another path. Everyone I might have loved had I lived another life. His eyes found hers again, but I ceased grieving for that man long ago. This is who I am. It is the only way I know how to be. Emily reached for his hand, weaving her fingers through his. Then teach me, she whispered, how to be the woman who can exist in your world without losing the person I am in my own. I don't know if such a thing is possible. We can't know if we don't try. Adrienne drew her in for a kiss, this one softer than the first, almost hesitant, as if committing the texture of her lips to memory. Parting, he rested his forehead on hers, a fragile echo of before. Get some sleep, he murmured. The day ahead will be long. Will you stay here with me? She felt the tension in him, the instinct to withdraw and rebuild the walls she had briefly breached. But something shifted within him. He exhaled, his grip on her hand tightening. Yeah, he said, his voice a near whisper. I'll stay. They lay in her guest suite, fully dressed atop the bedsheets, his arm a solid weight around her as she rested her head against his chest. It was the most ordinary act they had shared, and by far the most intimate. There was no performance, just two souls who had collided at the worst of times, seeking a moment of peace before the coming war. Emily must have drifted off, for she woke to pale light tracing the windows, and the space beside her was empty. Adrienne was gone. A note sat on the nightstand, the script familiar from his office papers. 7 p.m. Don't be late. She held the note for a long time before rising to face the day. The hours passed with an agonizing crawl. Emily attempted to eat, but could manage only toast. She tried her phone for distraction, but her focus was a shattered thing. By evening, her nerves were stretched so taut she felt a constant tremor. Marco arrived at 6:30, the SUV unmarked, its windows blacked out. He offered no pleasantries, navigating silently through the city toward the east side as Emily watched the familiar streets dissolve into unknown territory. As they approached the warehouse district, the sun was sinking, staining the sky with ominous shades of orange and blood red. The structure appeared ahead, a perfect match to the surveillance images, vast, industrial, and isolated by vacant lots and wire fencing. No lights showed from within, but Emily saw the dark shapes of vehicles near the loading bay. Calabrese was already present, Marco guided the SUV into a concealed spot behind a ruin of old buildings about 200 yards out. Their vantage offered a perfect view of the entrance while keeping them cloaked in shadow. 2 other vehicles were already settled into their positions, Adrienne's team waiting for his command. "Where is Adrian?" Emily asked, her voice tight. "South entrance, with Sophia and 3 more. When Calabrizzi's shipment is inside, they will block the exits." Marco passed her a small radio and an earpiece. "You can monitor all communications, but do not transmit unless it is a life or death situation. And you remember the agreement. You do not leave this vehicle whatever happens." With trembling fingers, Emily fitted the earpiece. The world dissolved into a series of clipped voices. Adrian's quiet commands, acknowledgments of position, the organized chaos of people preparing for violence, and then his voice, impossibly calm and clear through the static. "Sound off." One by one, his people began to answer. Emily could make out 8 distinct voices, Marco's excluded. A force of 9 against the 10 or 12 Calabrizzi commanded, not to mention any security already present. The math was stark. They were at a disadvantage. Then a pair of headlights sliced the growing twilight as a truck approached. It reversed toward the loading dock with a practiced ease that felt unnerving. From the warehouse, 6 men appeared and began to handle the truck's contents. "We have eyes on the target," a voice crackled through the comms. "Calabrizzi is exiting on the east side, flanked by 3 men." A frantic drumbeat started in Emily's chest. This was no longer a plan. This was happening. In her ear, Adrian's voice remained a pillar of calm, an island of absolute control. "Wait for the signal. Nobody breathes until I give the word." The offloading proceeded without a hitch. Calabrizzi stood by, observing with an occasional gesture, utterly relaxed, as if this were just another mundane delivery. No cause for alarm, no hint of danger. And then the world came undone. One of Calabrizzi's men glanced at his phone, his face paling before he began to scream. Calabrizzi's head whipped around, his eyes sweeping the darkness. He knew someone had betrayed them. "Abort!" Adrienne's voice was a shard of glass now. "Everyone, pull out!" A gunshot split the night. Emily couldn't see who fired first. She only knew the darkness had erupted into a chaotic ballet of muzzle flashes and cracking reports as figures scattered into the pandemonium. Through the windshield, she watched as Adrienne's team broke from their hidden positions. Their answering fire, a desperate bid to reclaim a situation already lost to chaos. Adrian himself was a phantom near the south entrance, moving with a chilling grace, eliminating targets she couldn't even perceive. Sophia was at his side, protecting his flank. Then Calabrizzi's men flooded from the building as if they had been lying in wait. Marco was already in motion, shifting the SUV into drive. "We have to go, now!" "What about Adrienne?" "He'll survive. Our mission is getting you clear." "No." Her hand closed around the door handle. "I am not leaving him." "Miss Carter, you made a promise." "I know exactly what I promised." Emily forced the door open and was gone from the SUV before Marco could stop her. She heard his muffled curse, his shouts for her to come back, but she was already sprinting toward the warehouse, toward the sound of war, toward Adrian. This was madness, a suicide run. It was a betrayal of every single rule he had laid down for her, but she could not drive away. She could not sit in a bubble of safety while he fought. She could not be the person who chose her own life over standing with someone who meant everything. She made it barely 30 yards before she was seized from behind. Emily's training ignited before her mind could catch up to the reality of the assault. She dropped her center of gravity, just as Sophia had taught her, twisting into the attacker's grip and driving an elbow back with all her strength. She felt the brutal connection, heard a choked grunt of pain, and was suddenly free. She spun, prepared, only to freeze. She was staring into the face of one of Calabrizzi's men, a boy younger than she'd imagined, in his mid-20s, holding a gun that was now aimed squarely at her heart. "Don't you move," he gasped, winded from her blow. In that instant, every lesson from Sophia evaporated. All that remained was the cold, hard fact of the weapon. Her hands lifted in surrender as her mind screamed a single terrifying thought. This is it. This is how I die. 30 seconds after making the most foolish choice of my life, then Adrian's voice cut through the bedlam. "Let her go." He had appeared as if from thin air, moving with that same deadly velocity she remembered from the wedding. His weapon was locked on the man holding her, his entire being a coiled spring of violence. But his expression was different now. It was not the cold calculus of a killer. What she saw in his eyes was pure terror. "Back away, Moretti," the young man threatened, his own voice unsteady. "I'll shoot her. I mean it." "You won't." Adriana's voice was preternaturally calm, because the second you do, you cease to exist. And unlike her, your absence will not be mourned. You don't know that. I know you're Danny Russo. You started with Calabrizzi 8 months ago. I know your mother resides in Queens and your sister just enrolled at NYU. Adrienne took one slow step forward. I know that if you pull that trigger, their lives will never be safe again. Do you comprehend what I am saying to you? Danny's aim wavered. Emily saw the dawning horror in his eyes, the realization that he hadn't just grabbed a woman, he had grabbed Adrian Moretti's entire world. "Let her walk to me," Adrian said, his voice low. "Do that, and this night is over for you. You get in your car, you go to your mother's, and you tell her you're done with this life. You find another way, one that doesn't end with you bleeding out on a warehouse floor for making a poor decision. Calabrizzi will murder me if I let her go. Calabrizzi will be far too occupied with his own preservation to worry about you, but I will worry. I will remember that you had the chance to be smart and you took it. That means something to me." The stalemate held for perhaps 10 seconds. For Emily, it was a lifetime. She heard the battle rage around them, saw Adrian's finger resting on the trigger, and felt her own pulse hammering in her ears. Then Danny lowered his weapon. "Go," he whispered to Emily. She needed no further encouragement. She crossed the space in 3 shaky steps, and he instantly pulled her behind him, his gun still tracking Danny until the young man vanished into the fray. "What in the hell were you thinking?" Adriana's voice was a blade in the quiet. "I couldn't leave you." "You promised you would remain in the car." "I'm aware." "You could have died." "I know." Adrian seized her arm, his grip anything but gentle, and began pulling her toward the SUV as Marco brought it closer. "We are leaving, now." "But Calabrizzi is Marco's problem. You made your choice, Emily. Now you will face the consequences." They had almost reached the vehicle when Sophia's voice crackled on the radio. "Adrian, we have a complication. Calabrizzi's heading for the north exit. If he reaches his car, I'm engaged." Adrienne cut her off. "Let him go." "Boss, if he escapes—" "I said let him go." Adrienne shoved Emily toward the SUV where Marco was waiting. "Get her out of this. Take her to the penthouse and ensure she stays there until I arrive. What about you? Emily asked. I'm ending this. Adrian, wait. But he was already turning back to the warehouse, back to the danger she had magnified by her own disobedience. Emily tried to follow, but Marco's arm blocked her path. Don't, he said, his tone firm. You've done enough harm for one evening. The words were a physical blow because they were true. Emily allowed Marco to lead her into the SUV, her eyes watching through the window as Adrienne was swallowed again by the firefight, and she felt something vital break deep inside her chest. The ride back was heavy with silence, filled only by the disembodied chatter from the radio. Emily heard Adrian coordinating his people, heard the clinical confirmation of targets, positions, and exits. She heard Sophia's final report that Calabrese had reached his car and was gone. They had lost, and the failure was hers. By the time they arrived at Adrian's building, the battle was over. The radio was silent. Marco steered into the underground garage and switched off the engine, but for a moment neither moved. Is he safe? Emily asked, her voice a whisper. He will be. He always is. Marco's response was flat, professional. But you need to grasp something, Miss Carter. When you ran out there, you didn't just risk your own life. You forced Adrian to choose between the mission and you. That isn't fair to him. And it's not fair to the people who rely on him to make the correct decision. I know. Do you? Because from this seat, it appears you are treating this as some thrilling story, as if the repercussions are not real. Marco turned to face her directly. Danny Russo could have taken your life tonight. Adrian would have taken his in return. And then Danny's mother and sister would have paid the price because some paralegal from the city decided she had something to prove. Tears burned at the back of Emily's eyes. I didn't mean for... Intention is meaningless. Results are everything. You want to be in this world? Then you must accept that your actions have consequences far beyond yourself. They create ripples. They affect people you will never know, and sometimes they ruin lives. Marco's hardened expression softened, just for a second. Adrian cares for you more than he probably should, but that does not give you the right to put him in an impossible corner because you're too headstrong to listen. He got out of the SUV without another word. Emily sat alone in the quiet vehicle for a long time, Marco's words echoing in her mind before she finally willed herself to move and follow him to the elevator. The penthouse felt cavernous and cold without Adrian. Emily went directly to her suite, shed her clothes, and stood beneath a stream of scalding water until her skin was raw. Yet no amount of burning water could scour away the vision of Danny's gun, of the raw fear on Adrian's face as he appeared, of the choice she had forced upon him. Wrapped in a towel, she sat on the bed's edge when she heard the front door click open. Emily dressed quickly in jeans and a t-shirt, nothing of consequence, and walked out to the living area. Adrian stood there looking as if he'd aged 10 years in the last 3 hours. His shirt was torn. A smear of blood stained his sleeve, and she could not tell if it was his. His hands were trembling, almost imperceptibly, as he poured himself a drink. Are you hurt? Emily asked from the doorway. No, the blood is not mine. He drained the glass in a single motion, then poured another. His crew was safe. 3 wounded, but all would live. Calabrese had slipped away, yet his shipment was ash, his operation fractured. It would buy 6 months of reprieve. I'm sorry, he murmured. Are you? Adrian turned, and in his eyes, Emily saw a dangerous truth. Sorry you disobeyed, or just sorry you were caught? Both, neither, I don't know. She moved deeper into the room, a chasm opening between them. I'm sorry for making this harder, for forcing your hand between the mission and me. I'm sorry I ignored you, but I'd do it again. It was not a question. A lie tempted Emily, a vow of caution she knew she could not keep. But Adrian had demanded her honesty, and that was a debt she would pay. Probably, she conceded. If I believed you were in peril and I could help, yes, I would probably do it again. A harsh, bitter laugh escaped him. You have no concept of how to help, Emily. You possess 6 hours of defensive training and a death wish. That isn't enough to survive a firefight. It's only enough to get yourself killed and to make me live with failing to protect you. I don't need your protection. Yes, you do. That is the entire point of this. It's why you are here and not in your apartment, because someone tried to end my life and you became collateral. The only way to ensure your safety is to keep you close. He set his glass down with a force that should have shattered it. But I cannot keep you safe if you refuse to follow basic orders. I cannot shield you if you continue running toward the fire just to prove something. I'm not trying to prove anything. Then what were you doing tonight? Because from my vantage point, it looked like you were trying to prove you are courageous enough for my world, strong enough to endure whatever comes, that you are not the quiet, forgettable woman Nathaniel Ashford discarded. Adrian closed the space between them, his gaze intense. But you don't have to prove any of that to me, Emily. I already see who you are. I have known since you strode into the Crimson Lounge with that preposterous ring and asked for my help with something that should have been beneath me. You're brave and stubborn and so fiercely determined to matter that you will place yourself in harm's way just to prove you can. And that terrifies me more than anything Calabrese could ever do. Tears finally spilled over Emily's cheeks. I don't know how to be any other way. I'm not asking you to be different. I'm asking you to trust that your place here is not something you must earn by risking your life. You already belong. You belonged the instant you sat in my office uninvited and told me you knew what it was to be underestimated. Then why does it feel like I must constantly prove it? Because Nathaniel convinced you that you were not enough, that being quiet and content was the same as being invisible, and now you are so desperate to be the opposite, you've swung to the other extreme. Adrian was directly before her now, near enough to touch. You don't need to be reckless to be remarkable, Emily. You simply need to be you. And what if I'm not enough for this world? Then we will face that together. He pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could feel the rhythm of his heart. But you do not get to sacrifice yourself trying to conform to a version of this life that is not real. You do not get to hurl yourself into danger because you believe it's what I require. What I need is you, alive. Everything else can be negotiated. Emily pressed her face to his chest, letting the tears fall freely, for the terror she had felt, for the ghost of how wrong things could have gone, for the knowledge that loving Adrian meant forever walking the line between who she was and who his world demanded her to be. I hate that I made things worse, she choked against his shirt. You did, but you also saved yourself when Danny grabbed you. That elbow strike would have impressed Sophia. She felt his lips brush her hair. And you trusted me to pull you from it. That has meaning too. Even though I never should have been there. They stood that way for a long while, wrapped in each other's arms, in the center of Adrian's flawless living room. Finally, he drew back just enough to see her face. This is the arrangement, he said. You can be a part of this world. You can be by my side when things become dangerous, but you must have faith in me when I tell you to stand down. You must believe that keeping you safe is not the same as keeping you small. Can you do that?" Emily considered it, truly considered it. She thought about what it meant to live in Adrian's world without losing herself, about striking a balance between being strong and being wise. "I can try," she said at last. "That's all I'm asking." Adrian kissed her then, a slow and profound kiss as if memorizing her. When they parted, he rested his forehead against hers, a gesture that had become uniquely theirs. "What happens now?" Emily asked, with calibracy. "Now, he knows I am willing to go to war over this, that I will dismantle his operation piece by piece until he surrenders or flees. He will most likely make contact in the coming days to negotiate terms." Adrian's voice was clinical. "He'll require an assurance that I won't pursue him again. I will require an assurance that you are off limits. We will reach a settlement and things will return to how they were before he chose to cross a line that should never be crossed. Just like that. Just like that. This is how it operates. We battle until one side wins, or until both sides see that continued conflict is more costly than any victory. Then, we forge a peace until the next time someone decides to test the boundaries. Emily tried to envision a life like this, endless cycles of violence and negotiation, relying on a temporary truce she knew could shatter at any moment. It should have horrified her, sent her fleeing back to her quiet apartment and her ordinary life, but instead she just felt an immense exhaustion. "I don't know if I can do this," she confessed. "I know, and if you decide you can't, I will understand. I will see that you're protected. I will ensure Calibrazi knows you are not leverage. I will make sure you can return to your life without glancing over your shoulder." Adrian's voice was gentle. "But I hope you will stay." "Why?" "Because you make me recall what it feels like to desire something more than survival. Because you see me as more than the violence I carry. Because in 2 weeks, you became someone I cannot imagine my life without." He pulled back, looking at her directly. "I love you, Emily. And I know it is unfair to say that while you are trying to decide if you can bear this world, but you wanted honesty, and that is the truth." Emily's breath caught. A part of her had known for days, perhaps weeks, but hearing him speak it aloud made it real in a way that changed everything. "I love you too," she said, "which is why this is so difficult. Because loving you means accepting all of this. The danger, the moral compromises, the truth that men like Danny Russo exist as a result of choices you have made. And I don't know if I'm strong enough to bear that." "You don't have to bear it alone." "But I do have to bear it. That is what being with you requires. It means sharing the weight of your world, even the parts I'd rather not inspect too closely." Adrian was silent for a long moment, then he said, "What if we made a different choice?" "What do you mean?" "I mean, what if I pulled back from some of this, appointed people I trust to manage the daily operations, and moved away from the front lines? I cannot leave this life completely. I have too many duties, too many people who depend on me, but I could create a separation. Make it so you are not perpetually exposed to the worst parts." Emily stared at him. "You would do that?" "I would try. For you, I would try." He cupped her face with his hands. "I cannot promise I will become a different man. I cannot promise there won't be more nights like tonight. but I can promise to build a life where those nights are the exception, not the rule. Where you do not have to choose between loving me and losing yourself. And if it fails, if you cannot step back as much as you believe, then we will solve it together, just as we have solved everything else. Adrienne's smile was uneven, uncertain in a way she had never seen. I don't have all the answers, Emily. I am inventing this as I go, the same as you. But I know I want to try if you are willing to meet me halfway. Emily's thoughts turned to the woman she had been 3 weeks ago. Small, invisible, convinced she was destined to be forgotten. She thought of the woman she had become. Stronger, braver, still discovering her own boundaries, but no longer afraid to challenge them. And she pictured the woman she could be if she stayed, if she chose this life, if she built a future beside a man who had seen her when she was nothing and taught her how to become something. It would not be easy. It would likely be the hardest thing she had ever attempted. But standing there in Adrienne's arms, feeling his attention like a solid, real thing, Emily realized her choice had already been made. Her choice was cemented the moment she ran toward the warehouse, not from it. "All right," she whispered. "Let's try." The utter relief that washed over Adrienne's face was so powerful, it nearly broke her. He kissed her once more, a slower, deeper promise, and Emily allowed herself to fall into it, to imagine a future not yet written, one they would have to build from the wreckage. It would be nothing like the fairy tale she'd envisioned with Nathaniel, offering no safety or predictability, but it would be theirs. Something real, not performed. And maybe that was enough. The next 3 months proved nothing of value comes without a price. As Adrienne had foreseen, Calabrese reached out 4 days after the confrontation. The truce required 2 weeks of tense negotiation, involving more lawyers than Emily thought a criminal treaty warranted. But a pact was eventually struck. Calabrese kept his domain, Adrienne kept his, and Emily was officially removed from the board as leverage. The agreement was documented, witnessed, and secured by the threat of mutual destruction, a guarantee both sides trusted for the time being. Adrienne honored his pledge to step back. He promoted Marco to manage the day-to-day, brought in trusted associates for the business's riskier elements, and began focusing on legitimate ventures that didn't need to be defended with violence. It was hardly a clean break. Some nights he still came home, coiled with a silent tension. There were still hushed phone calls in Italian she had learned not to ask about, but it was progress. Emily held to her promise, too. She found a new role at a nonprofit aiding survivors of domestic abuse, using her legal skills to help people navigate a system that had abandoned them. It was more demanding than her old paralegal work and paid less, but it felt true in a way that filing paperwork never could. She was fighting for people made invisible by their circumstances. She understood them now in a way she never could have before Adrienne. She officially moved into the penthouse after 6 weeks. Claudia greeted this change with her usual professional detachment, though Emily once caught her smiling when she successfully navigated a dinner party of Adrienne's associates without betraying her fear. Maya remained wary but loyal, which Emily cherished. She'd given her best friend a censored version of the story. Met a man. It moved fast. His job is complicated, but we're making it work. Maya had taken one look at Emily's expression when she spoke of Adrienne and stopped asking difficult questions. Some truths are better left unspoken. The grandmother's ring stayed in its velvet box upon Emily's dresser. She attempted to return it to Adrian on multiple occasions, but he always declined. It was never about the ring, he had told her the last time she raised the subject. Keep it. Give it to our daughter someday. The casual reference to a future that held children had stolen Emily's breath. They hadn't discussed that kind of permanence, not marriage or family or anything beyond surviving each day together. But the possibility was now alive, spoken into the air. 3 months after the warehouse, Emily stood before the mirror in what had been the guest suite and was now simply her room. Their room, technically, though Adrian still maintained his own quarters for nights when insomnia made a shared bed an impossibility. She was adorned in another dress Adrian had arranged for, this one, emerald green, preparing for another high society event she didn't wish to attend. But this time, it was not about proving a point. It was just a part of the life she had selected. Adrian materialized in the doorway, already in a tuxedo, looking unfairly handsome. "Are you ready?" he asked. Emily turned from the mirror. "Do I have a choice?" "Unfortunately, yes. This is the mayor's fundraiser. If we are absent, people will talk. And we must care what people say. Because my legitimate work depends on cordial terms with those who can make my life difficult." Adrian crossed the room, drawing her into his embrace. "But if you truly cannot bear it, we will send our regrets and stay home." Emily weighed the offer. She could call Maya, order food, and spend the night on the couch watching terrible television with a man who had forged an empire from fear, but looked at her as if she were something precious. It sounded infinitely more appealing than trading pleasantries with politicians. But she had learned a crucial lesson over the last 3 months. Sometimes the difficult choice is the correct one. Sometimes simply showing up is what matters. "No, we should go," she said, "but you are buying me very expensive wine to endure it." "Done." They were halfway to the door when Emily paused. "Adrien?" "Yes. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible, for teaching me my own strength, for loving me even when my terrible decisions put us both at risk." Adrien pulled her close again, his arms wrapping tightly around her. "Thank you for being brave enough to enter my office with that ridiculous ring, for being stubborn enough to remain when I tried to force you away, for loving me despite all the things you know I have done." Emily turned in his arms, rose to her toes, and kissed him. When they parted, she said, "We're a complete mess, aren't we?" "Entirely," he agreed, "but we are our mess. I can live with that." "Good, because you're stuck with me." They left the penthouse as one, Adrian's hand at the small of Emily's back, and proceeded toward another night of performance. This time, however, Emily was not pretending. She was precisely who she was meant to be, strong, stubborn, and still learning how to exist in a world that had nearly shattered her. She had survived Nathaniel's dismissal. She had survived her own desperation. She had survived entering Adrian Moretti's world and discovering that the price of love was sometimes violence, sometimes fear, sometimes choices that stole her sleep. But she had also found she was capable of far more than she had ever dreamed. That being seen was worth the risk of being hurt. That loving someone required accepting all of them, even the parts that terrified you. The fundraiser was precisely as dull as Emily had braced for. Politicians made speeches filled with promises they would break. Donors wrote checks for tax deductions, and everyone pretended they were there out of compassion instead of a need to be seen. Emily endured 2 hours of small talk before she needed air. Excusing herself from a city councilman who kept touching her arm, she slipped onto a terrace where the cool autumn air might clear her head. She wasn't alone for long. Emily Carter. She turned to find Nathaniel a few feet away, drink in hand, looking just as she recalled, still polished, still handsome, still utterly empty. "Nathaniel," she stated flatly, "how's married life?" "Good. Fine, you know." He drew nearer, his face a mask of curiosity and concern. "I heard you've been seeing Adrian Moretti. Is that true?" "It is," Emily confirmed. "I don't know if that's a good idea. The man has a reputation." "I know his reputation." She met his gaze without flinching. "I know exactly who he is, and I chose him anyway, just as your wife chose you. I suppose we all make our decisions about what we're willing to live with." Nathaniel's jaw tightened. "I worry about you." "You forfeited the right to worry about me when you ended our engagement for a more politically advantageous match. But I appreciate the concern." Emily started to walk away, then paused. "Actually, no, I don't appreciate it. You don't get to pretend you care now that I've moved on. You don't get to critique my choices or suggest I'm making a mistake simply because I am with someone you disapprove of. I'm happy, Nathaniel. For the first time in years, I am genuinely happy. And if you cannot be happy for me, then at least have the decency to leave me alone." She didn't linger for his reply. She just walked back inside, found Adrian speaking with the mayor, and wove her hand into his. He glanced down, a question in his eyes. "Ready to leave?" he murmured, "more than ready." They offered their excuses and departed within 10 minutes. The ride back to the penthouse was quiet and easy, Emily's hand resting on Adrian's thigh as he navigated the now familiar streets. This was her city now, her life, her decision. "Nathaniel was there," Emily said as they pulled into the underground garage. "I know, I saw him watching you. Does it bother you that he's my ex?" Adrienne switched off the engine and turned to face her. "Should it?" "I don't know. Some people would be." "I am not some people, and you are no longer with him. You are with me. That's all that matters." He reached across the console and kissed her softly. "Besides, I think we both know you traded up." Emily laughed, a real sound that came from a deep and honest place. "Yeah, I really did." They went upstairs together, trading the formal clothes for comfortable ones, and settled on the couch with wine and takeout from the Thai restaurant that Adrian insisted made the best pad CUW in the city. It was domestic and ordinary and completely incongruous with the violence that had brought them together. But that was the truth of building a life. It was not all danger and drama. Most of it was just this: quiet nights, shared meals, and the comfortable silence of two people who had chosen each other against all reason. "I have been pondering," Adrian murmured through a bite of noodles, "about where we go from here in the long run." He set his meal aside, his gaze locking with hers. "I want you to be my wife." The world stopped for Emily. "What?" "Not immediately. Not next month, nor the year after. But when the time is right for us both, I want to marry you, to create a life that is ours alone, to have children if that is your wish, to build something that is not founded on terror or bloodshed or any of the darkness that colored my world before you came into it. Adrian, I realize this is a heavy thought. I know we are still finding our way, but you must know, when I envision what is to come, you are always there. And if that thought terrifies you, if the weight is too great, tell me now and I will retreat. But if even a whisper of you wants the same, I need to hear it." Emily lowered her own bowl, a slight tremor in her hands. She pictured the existence she had once planned with Nathaniel, safe, certain, and utterly stifling. Then she saw the life she was forging with Adrian, perilous, unknown, and profoundly real. She contemplated the woman she had been, the one she was becoming, and the person she might be 5 years on if she continued down this path. "I want that too," she whispered. "I want to marry you. I want us to build that life. I want every part of it, especially the frightening parts." Adrian's smile was like the breaking dawn. He gathered her into his lap, their kiss leaving them both breathless as their forgotten dinner turned cold. "We will make countless errors," he breathed against her lips. "Probably. We will argue and terrify one another and question if this is the right course. Almost certainly. But we will navigate it all as one." "Yes," Emily affirmed, her fingers weaving through his hair. "Together." They settled on no date that night. They made no intricate plans, nor debated practicalities. They simply dwelled in the promise of a future that was theirs to claim, one built on a series of choices they made and remade with every passing day. 6 months later, Adrian proposed in earnest, not with his grandmother's ring, which remained in its velvet case as a testament to their beginning, but with something new, something that symbolized what they were constructing, not what they had overcome. Emily accepted. They were wed a year after in an intimate ceremony with only those who truly mattered. No officials, no society figures, no one for whom they had to perform. Just Marco and Sophia, Claudia and Maya, and the small circle of others who had become their true family. It was not without its flaws. Emily was still ambushed by nightmares of the warehouse, of Danny's weapon, of the infinite ways it all could have ended differently. A trace of violence still clung to Adrian. He still made choices that Emily struggled with, navigating a world that demanded moral compromises she was slowly learning to live with. But they were always truthful with one another. They argued when a fight was needed, apologized when they were at fault, and continued to choose each other, even when walking away would have been the easier path. 2 years into their marriage, Emily stood in the former guest suite, now a nursery, holding their daughter Isabella, named for Adrian's grandmother. She was struck by the distance she had traveled from the woman who had entered the Crimson Lounge with a desperate gamble. Adrian appeared at the door, his expression a mix of exhaustion and pure happiness. "Is she asleep?" he whispered. "Finally. I believe she inherited your defiance and your resolve. We are in for a challenge." He crossed the space to wrap his arms around them both. "How are you?" "Tired, sore, and completely enchanted by this tiny person who refuses to let me sleep." Emily looked up at him. "How are you?" "Terrified that I will ruin this, grateful that you are here to stop me." Adrian kissed the crown of Isabella's head and then Emily's brow. "Thank you." "For what?" "For seeing something in me worth saving. For being brave enough to stay when I tried to drive you off. For building all of this with me." His voice cracked. "For making me believe I could be more than what I was." Carefully, mindful of the sleeping infant in her arms, Emily kissed him. "We saved each other. That is how we work." They stood that way in the nursery, bathed in the soft luminescence of a single low-burning lamp, and Emily's thoughts drifted to the ring she had tried to exchange for her dignity, to the man who had looked past her desperation and seen the strength beneath, to the choices that had guided her here, to this very moment, to a life she never could have conceived. It was not the fairy tale she had once craved. It was better. It was genuine. And 3 weeks from then, when Emily would discover the velvet box on Isabella's dresser with a note in Adrian's hand, for when she is old enough to understand what it means to choose her own destiny, she would shed tears of joy, knowing every trial had been worthwhile, because they had created something that could not be broken by violence or fear or the weight of their histories. They had created something that belonged to them, to their daughter, and to the future they were shaping one decision at a time. They had created a home. And Emily Carter, who had once been invisible, who had once believed she was meant to be forgotten, stood within that home with the family she had chosen and felt at long last completely and utterly seen.
Emily thought she was walking into a lion's den just to save face at her ex-fiancé's wedding. She carried a ring, a wounded ego, and one desperate mission: make Nathaniel regret losing her. But the plot twist hit harder than anyone expected. The dangerous man she tried to hire did not just agree to play boyfriend. Adrian Moretti tore down the version of her that had been trained to stay quiet, shrink herself, and accept disrespect as fate. That is the first life lesson. Humiliation can become fuel when a person stops begging for dignity and starts building it. Emily did not win because Nathaniel got jealous. She won the moment she stopped needing his approval. That is the real revenge arc. Not the dress, not the dramatic entrance, not the whispers in the ballroom. The real flex was that she looked at the man who discarded her and felt nothing powerful enough to own her anymore. And then came the second twist. Adrian, the man who seemed like the answer, turned out to be a battlefield too. His world was built on danger, control, and blood-soaked consequences. Emily learned that pain does not disappear just because a stronger person walks into the story. Sometimes the new chapter is not softer, it is sharper, but it forces growth. That is the second lesson. Life does not always heal through comfort. Sometimes it heals through pressure. Sometimes a broken person needs to be confronted with the truth that they were never weak, only convinced to act weak. Emily's comeback was not magic. It was repetition, pain, fear, and choice. By the time the wedding ended, Nathaniel thought he was watching a woman show off a new man. He was wrong. He was watching a woman bury the old version of herself, and that is why this story hits. Because heartbreak did not destroy her. It exposed the part of her that had been sleeping. Some people lose love and become smaller. Emily lost love and turned into a consequence.